Good evening, listeners. Welcome to Noir Intellect. I'm your host, Victor Blackwood. If you enjoy mysteries, hidden clues, and uncovering the truth, don't forget to like and subscribe. And tell me, where in the world are you watching from? Leave it in the comments below. Now, keep your eyes open and your mind sharp. The mystery begins now. Chapter 1. The figure across the street. At 8:40 every evening, the man under the street lamp across from our brownstone arrived. At 9:05 he disappeared. He did not arrive early, and he did not stay late. He did not pace, smoke, read a newspaper, consult a watch, hail a cab, or engage in any of the ordinary activities by which a man proves that he has somewhere to be. He simply stood beneath the street lamp and looked at Nero Wolfe's house. For 6 evenings I considered him a nuisance. On the 7th I decided he was a problem. On the 8th he raised one hand toward our windows, and I decided he was either a lunatic, a spy, or a man with a reason for standing in the cold and staring at a house occupied by the world's most expensive sedentary detective. The 9th evening brought a photograph. That was when I stopped wondering who he was and began wondering why somebody wanted him dead. At least, that was my first theory. It was wrong. But before I explain why, I should explain the street. West 35th Street is not generally a place where a man can stand unnoticed for 9 consecutive evenings unless the people who notice him have decided he is harmless. Our brownstone has stood there long enough to acquire a reputation, and reputations attract 2 kinds of visitors: people who need Nero Wolfe, and people who want to know what sort of people need Nero Wolfe. The first kind usually comes to the door. The second kind usually watches it. I had seen both. The brownstone itself is a large, dignified brown brick structure with a narrow stoop and a front door that has resisted weather, tenants, policemen, process servers, bill collectors, and the occasional enthusiastic admirer. Its windows are tall, its curtains are discreet, its interior is warm in winter, cool enough in summer, and generally smells either of orchids, food, tobacco, books, or some combination of all 4. The orchids come from Wolfe's plant rooms upstairs. The food comes from Fritz, the tobacco comes from Wolfe, the books come from everywhere, and the trouble comes through the front door. On the first evening I noticed the figure. I was standing at the office window after dinner, smoking a cigarette and considering whether the evening's newspaper had contained anything worth remembering. It had not. Wolfe was in his chair. He had been in his chair for nearly an hour, reading a book on 17th century horticulture that contained more information about flowers than I had ever expected a human being to desire. "There's a man across the street," I said. Wolfe turned a page. "I have seen men before. He's watching the house. Many men have watched the house. Not for 25 minutes. That is an improvement over some." I looked back through the curtains. The man stood beneath the street lamp. He was perhaps 45, perhaps 50. The distance and darkness concealed details, but his silhouette suggested a medium build, a long overcoat, and a hat with a narrow brim. His posture was peculiar, not tense, not relaxed, attentive. He faced our house directly. "You don't want to look?" "No." "Why? Because you are looking." "That's your logic?" "Among other things." I returned to the window. The figure had not moved. "He's been there since 8:40. Then he is punctual. It's 8:58. An impressive accomplishment. You're impossible. I am comfortable." I watched the street. A taxi passed. A woman carrying groceries hurried toward the corner. 2 boys emerged from a doorway farther down and disappeared into a side street. The man under the lamp remained still. At 9:05 precisely, he turned left and walked away. I watched until he disappeared. Then I said, "He'll be back tomorrow." Wolfe turned another page. "Then tomorrow you will tell me. You don't believe me." "I believe your eyes. You don't believe my suspicion." "I do not believe suspicions." "Why?" "Because they are lazy conclusions." I smiled. "That sounds like something you invented to discourage me." "No, I invented it to discourage you." That was the end of the conversation, at least for that night. The next evening at 8:40 he returned. I was ready for him. He appeared beneath the same street lamp, wearing the same overcoat and hat. I checked the time. 8:40. "Exactly. He's back," I said. Wolfe was examining an orchid. "He has formed a habit. 7 minutes ago you said nothing." "I did not know he had formed a habit." "He hasn't done anything." "Then you have nothing to report." "I have a man." "Where?" "Across the street." Keep him there. I looked at Wolfe. You know, sometimes I wonder whether your refusal to investigate is actually a form of investigation. Sometimes it is. Is this one of those times? No. Good. I went downstairs. The front door opened onto the stoop. I stepped outside and pretended to inspect the mail. The figure across the street did not move. I glanced toward him. He was looking at the house, not at me. That was interesting. I crossed the street. He did not retreat. I stopped 20 feet away. Good evening. No answer. Cold night. Nothing. You've chosen an excellent location. Still nothing. I looked at him more carefully. He was older than I had first thought. Perhaps 50. His face was narrow, his hair mostly hidden beneath the hat, and his overcoat was well made but old. He carried no umbrella, no briefcase, no newspaper, no cigarette. You've been standing here every night. His eyes moved to me. For the first time I saw them clearly, grey, steady, not frightened, not embarrassed. He looked at me for perhaps 3 seconds. Then he turned and walked away. I let him go. There was no point following him. I had already learned something. He wasn't interested in me. He was interested in the house. When I returned upstairs, Wolfe had not moved. You spoke with him, he said. Yes. What did he say? Nothing. What did you say? I made several brilliant observations, which he ignored. Correct. Then he is sensible. I sat down. He looked at me. Did he recognize you? I don't know. You should. Why? You are conspicuous. That's flattering. It is not intended to be. I lit another cigarette. He knows the house. How? He looked at it as though he were checking something. Something visible? I couldn't tell. Then you observed poorly. I observed a man standing under a street lamp. Anyone can do that. You want a professional? I want you. Unfortunately. Wolfe returned to his orchid. I watched him. Suppose he is watching you. He is. That stopped me. You know that? I know that anyone watching the house is watching me. You're not worried? No. Why? Because if he intended harm, he would not stand beneath a street lamp at the same time every evening. Unless he wants us to think that. Then he has failed. How? He has attracted your attention. I stared at him. That may be exactly what he wanted. Wolfe's eyes shifted toward me. Perhaps. It was the first sign that the figure had entered the category of things Wolfe might eventually care about. I made a note of it. For the next 4 evenings the routine continued. 8:40. The figure appeared. 9:05. The figure disappeared. No variation. No visible purpose. On the 3rd evening I stood beside Wolfe at the office window. He had finally consented to look. The figure stood under the lamp. Describe him, Wolfe said. Male, I can see that. Middle-aged. 5 feet 10. 5'11". How do you know? Proportion, coat, dark hat, grey, shoes, black, face, partly obscured. Hands, gloves, left or right? Which hand is visible? I looked. Right. Why? The left is in his pocket. Interesting. I watched more carefully. He's holding something. What? Can't tell. Try. The man shifted. For an instant the street lamp illuminated his right hand. A small rectangular object, black. He slipped it back into his coat. What was it? A phone, too large. A notebook. Possibly. Wolfe turned away. Then tomorrow, you will determine whether he is photographing the house. You could have asked me to do that 4 days ago. I did not know he possessed a rectangular object. Your generosity is overwhelming. He settled into his chair. Do not confront him. Why? If he is harmless, you will embarrass him. And if he isn't, you will alert him. To what? That we have noticed. I looked back toward the window. The figure remained motionless. I wondered whether Wolfe was right. Then I noticed something else. The man's head was angled slightly upward, not toward the front door, toward the second-floor windows, toward the office. I turned. Wolfe was watching him. Neither of us spoke. At 9:05 the figure disappeared. On the 6th evening rain threatened but did not arrive. The figure appeared at 8:40. At 8:52 a delivery truck blocked my view. At 8:54 the truck moved. The figure remained. At 8:58 a woman stopped near him and asked for directions. He answered. That was the first time I heard his voice. Low, calm, ordinary. The woman thanked him and continued. At 9:05 he left. I reported this to Wolfe. He speaks. That is reassuring. Why? Ghosts are frequently poor conversationalists. I stared at him. You've been making jokes about this. No, that was a joke. It was an observation. You really are impossible. I have been told. I sat down. He gave directions. Where did the woman come from? North. Where did she go? South. How long did she speak with him? Perhaps 15 seconds. Did she know him? Apparently not. Did he appear surprised? No. Was she carrying anything? Shopping bag. Did he touch it? No. Wolfe nodded. Useful. What is? He can interact with strangers without disrupting his routine. Why useful? It means the routine is more important to him than avoiding witnesses. You're assuming he has a routine. He has demonstrated it 6 times. Maybe he simply likes standing there. Then he has selected the most inconvenient hobby in Manhattan. I laughed. Wolfe didn't. His attention had shifted toward the window. Tomorrow, he said. Watch his hands. Again? Yes. Why? Because people control their faces. And their hands, less successfully. The 7th evening changed everything. At 8:40 the figure arrived. At 8:43 he looked toward the house. At 8:47 he checked his watch. At 8:51 he turned slightly. At 8:56 he looked directly toward the office window. At 8:59 he moved 1 step closer to the curb. At 9:03 he raised his right hand. He did not wave. He did not point. He simply raised it toward the brownstone and held it there. 3 seconds. 4. 5. Then he lowered it. I turned from the window. Wolfe. He was already looking. I saw. He signaled yes. To whom? I stared. You think so? I am certain. Why? Because he waited until I was looking. You can't know that. I can. How? His timing. I looked back. The figure had disappeared. Not at 9:05. At 9:04. For the first time, he had broken the pattern. I turned toward Wolfe. That's new. Yes. Does it bother you? No. You're lying. No. You've been interested since the first night. I have been interested since the first deviation. That was tonight. Correct. I reached for the telephone. Should I call Kramer? No. Why not? Because we do not yet know what happened. What happened is that a man signaled at us. That is an event, isn't it enough? No. Then what is? Wolfe looked at the clock. Tomorrow. The next morning at 9:17, the doorbell rang. I was in the office sorting mail. Wolfe was reading. Fritz was preparing lunch. I opened the door. A stranger stood on the stoop. He was younger than the man across the street. Late 30s. Tall jumpsuit. No hat. His expression was strained. Goodwin? That's me. I need to see Nero Wolfe. He's expensive, I was told. By whom? He looked over his shoulder toward the street. May I come in? I stepped aside. He entered. His eyes moved quickly around the hallway. Not admiring. Searching. That was the first thing I noticed. The second was that he carried a brown leather portfolio pressed tightly against his ribs. I closed the door. Name Daniel Kerr. Occupation, attorney, client. I need to speak with Mr. Wolfe first. He's upstairs. Is Inspector Kramer involved? Not yet. The man's face changed. That was enough. I pointed toward the office. Come on. Wolfe looked up as we entered. He saw the stranger, then the portfolio, then me. Mr. Wolfe, Daniel, Kerr said. I believe someone is watching your house. Wolfe nodded. I am aware. Kerr stopped. You know? Yes. How long? 8 evenings. The man's face went pale. Then you know more than I expected. I know less than you think. Kerr placed the portfolio on Wolfe's desk. I brought this because I don't know who else to trust. Wolfe did not touch it. What is it? A photograph of what? The man across the street. I looked at him. How did you get it? Kerr opened the portfolio. Inside was a large black and white photograph, old, grainy. The image showed a group of people standing on the steps of a country estate. 7 men, 4 women, 1 child. The photograph appeared to have been taken decades earlier. At first glance there was nothing remarkable. Then I saw the man standing at the far left. He was younger, much younger, but unmistakable. The same narrow face, the same grey eyes, the same slightly stooped shoulders, the man beneath our street lamp. I looked at Kerr. How old is this? 41 years. Wolfe finally reached for it. His eyes moved slowly across the photograph, then stopped. Who are these people? Kerr swallowed. Members of the Wainwright family. Wainwright? Yes. Where was this taken? At the Wainwright estate in Connecticut. Who is the man? Kerr pointed. That is Martin Wainwright. I looked again. The man across the street had been standing outside our house every evening now. He had a name. Wolfe's expression remained unreadable. Is he alive? Kerr hesitated. That's the problem. Explain. Martin Wainwright died 11 years ago. Silence filled the office. I looked from the photograph to Wolfe, then back to Kerr. You're telling us the man standing across the street is dead? I am telling you, Kerr said carefully, that the man in this photograph died 11 years ago. Wolfe placed the photograph flat on his desk. Who is the man in the photograph standing beside him? Kerr's face tightened. My father. And the woman? My aunt. The child? My older brother. Wolfe looked at the photograph again. Who took it? I don't know. Who owns it? It belonged to my father. Until... and now? It came to me. Why? Because my father left instructions. What instructions? Kerr opened his mouth, stopped, then said, if Martin Wainwright ever appeared again, I was to bring the photograph to Nero Wolfe. That interested Wolfe. He sat back. Why me? My father believed you would understand what it meant. Did your father know me? No. Then he was either a remarkable man or a careless one. He was neither. What was he? Frightened. I looked at the photograph again. The dead man smiled faintly from a world 41 years gone. Outside, a taxi horn sounded. Somewhere upstairs, Fritz moved a chair. Wolfe remained still. Mr. Kerr. Yes? Tell me everything your father knew about Martin Wainwright. Kerr's hand tightened around the edge of the portfolio. He knew Martin had been murdered. 11 years ago? Yes. Was his death ruled a homicide? No. Natural causes? No. Then what? Kerr met Wolfe's eyes. He disappeared. I felt a small chill. Disappeared? 11 years ago. And no body? No. Then why did you say he died? Because the family held a funeral.
Without a body?
Yes. Wolfe's fingers rested lightly on the photograph. And now? Kerr's voice dropped. Now someone who looks exactly like Martin Wainwright has been standing across from your house every evening. Wolfe studied him. Why did you wait until this morning? I didn't know whether the figure was him. But you have the photograph. I received it yesterday. From whom? Kerr hesitated. An envelope was left outside my office. Yes, inside? The photograph. One sentence. What sentence? Kerr looked at Wolfe. Your house is next. The room became very quiet. I glanced toward the window. West 35th Street looked entirely ordinary. Pedestrians, cars, a delivery truck, a woman walking a dog. Nothing unusual. Yet for 8 evenings, a man who had supposedly died 11 years earlier had stood beneath a street lamp and watched our house. Wolfe picked up the photograph again. His gaze moved to the dead man's face, then to the family gathered around him, then to a small detail near the edge of the image, a hand. One of the men in the photograph held something partly concealed behind his coat. Wolfe's eyes narrowed. Mr. Kerr. Yes. Who was the man standing beside Martin Wainwright? Kerr pointed. That was my father's business partner. Name? George Bell. Is he alive? No. Dead? 14 years. Wolfe nodded. Convenient. I looked closer at the photograph. 2 men in the picture had supposedly died. The man watching our house was supposed to be one of them. The photograph had been delivered anonymously, and someone had warned that our house was next. I said, Wolfe. He didn't answer. Wolfe. His eyes remained on the photograph. Finally he said, Mr. Goodwin. Yes, close the curtains. I did. Then Wolfe reached for the telephone. Call Inspector Kramer. I smiled. You finally admitted it's a case. No. He looked at the photograph. It has admitted itself. Chapter 2. The photograph with the missing corner. Inspector Kramer arrived at 9:43 that morning, which meant he had either driven very fast or decided, for once I was entitled to the privilege of being surprised. He came through the front door carrying his hat in one hand and irritation in the other. The irritation was customary. The hat was not. Kramer wore it when he expected a long day, and his long days were generally other people's fault. He stopped in the hall. Where is Wolfe? Office. With a lawyer. Yes. What's his name? Thomas Avery. Kramer frowned. I know that name. Estate lawyer. I know that too. You could have looked him up before coming. I could also have stayed home. That would have made 3 people happy. Name the other 2. Wolfe and the man who keeps standing across the street. Kramer stared at me. He's still there? No. He disappeared? At 9:04 last night. Why? Because he apparently enjoys breaking rules. What rules? The rules governing his own schedule. Kramer grunted. Take me to Wolfe. I led him into the office. Thomas Avery was seated opposite Wolfe. He was a quiet man, perhaps 40, with an angular face, dark hair beginning to grey at the temples, and the sort of expression cultivated by lawyers who spend their professional lives telling wealthy people that the document they have just signed does not mean what they think it means. His coat was folded neatly over the back of his chair. His hands rested together. He looked as though he had been sitting there for an hour, and had spent the entire hour wondering whether leaving would be more dangerous than staying. Wolfe was behind his desk. The photograph lay before him. Kramer entered. Wolfe glanced up. "Good morning, Inspector." "Is it?" "It is morning. You know what I mean. Unfortunately." Kramer looked at Avery. "You are Thomas Avery?" "Yes." "Estate attorney?" "Yes." "Representing whom?" "No one." "Are you here?" Then Avery looked toward Wolfe. "Mr. Wolfe has the photograph. I can see that. I came because I was instructed to bring it here." "By whom?" "Edwin Mercer." Kramer pulled a chair forward. "Dead?" "Yes." "How long?" "4 days. Cause?" "Natural causes." "You're certain?" "I am his attorney." "That wasn't my question." Avery hesitated. "His physician certified heart failure." Kramer looked at Wolfe. "Your client?" "No," Wolfe said. "Mr. Mercer's." Kramer nodded. "Then tell me about Edwin Mercer." He took a breath. "Mr. Mercer was 81 years old. He lived alone. He had no children. He was wealthy, though less so than people assumed. His principal interests were property, local history, and old business records." "How did you come into it?" "I handled his estate." "Before he died?" "Yes." "How long?" "9 years." Kramer leaned back. "And the photograph?" Avery looked at it. "It was among his private papers." "How long had he had it?" "We don't know. You said he spent his final years trying to identify someone in it." "Yes." "Who?" Avery looked at Wolfe. "The person missing from the photograph." Kramer frowned. "Missing?" Avery pointed. The photograph showed 6 men standing outside an enormous brick warehouse. The building was old but substantial, with tall loading doors, black windows, and a painted sign whose letters had faded almost beyond reading. The men stood in a loose line near the entrance. 5 were visible. The 6th should have been standing at the far right, but the upper right corner of the photograph had been cut away. Not torn, cut. A clean diagonal line removed part of the image. The remaining edge was too precise to be accidental. Kramer examined it. "Cut this." "Yes." "Who?" "We don't know." "When?" "We don't know." "Why?" That was what Mr. Mercer spent years trying to discover. Kramer looked at Wolfe. "And?" Wolfe said nothing. He was studying the photograph. I knew that look. It meant his attention had gone somewhere none of us could follow. Kramer turned back to Avery. "Who are the men?" Avery took a small notebook from his pocket. "Mr. Mercer identified 4 with certainty."
Jonathan Vale.
He indicated the man on the far left, warehouse owner. Next, Peter Caldwell, shipping contractor. Next, Arthur Bell, accountant. The 4th, Samuel Rook, labor organizer. Kramer pointed at the remaining man. "And him?" Mercer believed he was named Charles Haynes. Believed, never proved it. And the missing corner? Avery looked at the photograph. Mercer believed someone was standing there. Why? The surviving shadows. I looked again. The men stood in afternoon sunlight. Near the right edge, a shadow crossed the pavement. It appeared to belong to someone outside the surviving portion of the photograph. Kramer leaned closer. Wolfe finally spoke. "The missing man was standing beside them." Avery nodded. "Yes." "Not behind?" "No, beside." That's what Mr. Mercer believed. "How?" "The shadow." Wolfe said nothing. Kramer looked impatient. "Why did Mercer care?" Avery answered slowly. "Because he believed the missing man was connected to an old property transaction." "Which property?" "The warehouse." I looked at the photograph again. The building behind the men had an atmosphere of stubborn permanence. "What's the address?" I asked her. Avery answered. 27 Harrison Wharf. That meant something to me. Not much, but something. I had seen the name in Wolfe's newspaper clippings. "Isn't that the old freight district?" "It was," Avery said. "The warehouse was demolished 20 years ago." "Who owned it?" "Jonathan Vale." "And what happened to the property?" Avery glanced at Kramer. "That is complicated." "Good," I said. "Simple property matters are usually dull." Kramer ignored me. "Complicated how?" "The warehouse was transferred through 3 companies in the space of 2 years. Legally, apparently." "Apparently." Avery's mouth tightened. The records are incomplete. Wolfe lifted his eyes. That is rarely accidental. No, Avery said. Kramer looked at him sharply. You're telling me Mercer suspected fraud? Yes. How much? Enough to spend 20 years looking for one missing person. Kramer glanced again at the photograph. And you brought this here because a dead man told you to? Not exactly. Then exactly. Avery reached into his inner pocket and removed a folded sheet of paper. 3 months ago, mister. Mercer gave me written instructions. He handed it to Wolfe. Wolfe unfolded it. The writing was old-fashioned and remarkably steady. I watched his eyes move across the page. Then he handed it to me. It contained only a few sentences. If I die before the photograph is explained, give it to Nero Wolfe. Do not take it to the police first. If a man appears outside Wolfe's house who resembles anyone in the photograph, go immediately. Do not confront him. Do not follow him. Bring the photograph. I read it twice. Kramer took the page. Why didn't you come yesterday? Avery looked uncomfortable. I had no reason. The watcher had been there 8 nights. I didn't know. How did you learn about him? I didn't. Kramer frowned. Then what changed? Avery's face became pale. Last night I received a telephone call. From whom? I don't know. What was said? 3 words. Kramer waited. Avery swallowed. He's watching Wolfe. The room became quiet. Kramer looked at Wolfe. Wolfe looked at the photograph. I said, did the caller identify himself? No. Voice, male, age, impossible to tell. Accent? No. Background noise? Nah. Anything else? Avery hesitated. He said the photograph had been noticed. By whom? He didn't say. Kramer rose. Why wasn't this mentioned immediately? I was afraid. Of whom? Avery looked toward the window. The man across the street. Kramer turned. The dead man? Avery stared at him. You know? We know enough. No. Avery shook his head. You don't. He pointed toward the photograph. That's the problem. Kramer spent the next hour asking questions. He asked them in his usual manner, which was to ask 3 questions at once, and then become annoyed when the answer did not arrive in the order he preferred. Thomas Avery survived admirably. I liked him more after that. He explained that Edwin Mercer had not been an ordinary client. Mercer had inherited a modest fortune from a father who had spent his life acquiring distressed properties. The old man had died when Edwin was 30. The estate included several warehouses, 2 apartment buildings, and a collection of financial records that appeared unimportant until Mercer began studying them. One set concerned Harrison Wharf. Another concerned a company called Vale Storage and Transit. A third referred to a transfer of property ownership that had never been properly recorded. Mercer believed the warehouse had been taken illegally, Avery said. From whom? Kramer asked. The Vale family. Jonathan Vale owned it. That was the public record, and the private one contradicted it. How? Avery looked toward Wolfe. Someone else had an ownership interest. Who? We don't know. That's Mercer believed so. Kramer pointed to the photograph. Charles Haynes, possibly. Who was he? That was what Mercer couldn't determine. Then how did he know Haynes was involved? Because the man's name appeared in a ledger. Where is the ledger? Missing, Kramer swore softly. Naturally, I said. You haven't mentioned the warehouse photograph's date. Avery looked at me. September 1830 years ago. Who took it? Mercer believed a local newspaper photographer. Which newspaper? The Manhattan Ledger. That caught Wolfe's attention. His eyes moved toward me. I knew what he wanted. I picked up the telephone. 2 hours later, I was standing in a newspaper archive on Lower Broadway, surrounded by old city directories, photographs, and the accumulated evidence of several generations of reporters who had believed tomorrow's newspaper would make today's events permanent. They were wrong. Paper survives. Memory does not. I asked for the Manhattan Ledger photographs from September of the year Avery had given me. The archivist returned with 6 envelopes. The 5th contained a photograph of the Harrison Wharf warehouse. Same building, same group, same day. But the photograph was different. The missing corner remained. I stared. The upper right section showed a 6th man. He was standing beside the others. Not partly, completely. Young, tall, dark-haired. His right hand rested on the shoulder of Jonathan Vale. I examined his face. Then the photograph Wolfe had received. The resemblance was striking. The man standing across our street had the same narrow face, same eyes, same posture, older by 3 decades perhaps, but unmistakable. I asked for the original negative. The archivist found it. I photographed the image. Then I looked at the caption. Harrison Wharf transfer announcement. The names were listed. Jonathan Vale, Peter Caldwell, Arthur Bell, Samuel Rook, Charles and one more, Edwin Mercer. I stared at the name, Edwin Mercer, the dead man whose lawyer had brought us the photograph. I hurried back to the brownstone. Wolfe was in the office with Kramer and Avery. I placed the photograph before him. Nobody spoke. Wolfe examined it. His expression changed, only slightly. But I saw it. What is it? Kramer asked. The original newspaper photograph. Avery leaned forward, his face drained of color. That's him. Charles Haynes? Yes. The man in the complete photograph. Yes, I pointed to the caption. There's something else. Kramer read it. His eyes stopped. Edwin Mercer. Avery sat back. That's impossible, mister. Mercer wasn't involved in the warehouse transaction. He was there, apparently. Why did he spend 20 years trying to identify someone whose name he already knew? Avery stared at the image. I don't know. Wolfe spoke quietly. Perhaps because the name was not the mystery. I looked at him. The identity was. Yes, but the photograph identifies him. The original photograph does. He tapped the damaged copy. The copy does not. Why cut the corner? That is the question. Kramer leaned closer. Could somebody have cut it later to make the man disappear? Obviously. Why? Wolfe said nothing. He was looking at the complete photograph. At Charles Haynes. At Edwin Mercer. At the other men. Then his eyes moved toward the background. The warehouse wall, the loading doors, a painted sign, and beneath the sign, barely visible, a small rectangular plaque. Wolfe reached for his magnifying glass. Mr. Goodwin. Yes? Lane that. I handed him the newspaper photograph. He studied the plaque. Then he looked at Avery. Did Mr. Mercer ever mention a room number? Avery frowned. No, an office? No. A storage section? Any reference to the warehouse's interior? Avery thought. He mentioned a counting room. Where? Above the loading floor. Wolfe nodded. And who used it? I don't know. Mercer. I don't think so. Then why did he mention it? Avery hesitated. He said the truth had been kept above the warehouse floor. I looked at Wolfe. That sounds like one of your clients. I did not teach him. Perhaps he was a natural. Wolfe ignored me. He picked up the damaged photograph. The missing corner is not the important thing. Kramer looked annoyed. Then what is? The reason it was removed. Same difference. No. Wolfe's finger rested on the photograph. The person who cut it wanted to conceal something. Charles Haynes? Possibly, but the newspaper photograph shows him. Exactly. Kramer frowned. So why bother? Wolfe's eyes narrowed. Because the original photograph contains more than a man. He turned the photograph slightly. Look at the shadow. I leaned over. The 6 men stood in sunlight. Their shadows fell toward the lower left. But Charles Haynes's shadow was strange. It extended behind him at an angle that did not correspond to the others. I stared. Another person? No. Then what? An object. What object? Wolfe did not answer. He examined the enlarged image again. Finally he said, Mr. Goodwin, return to the archive. Again? Yes. What am I looking for? The photograph, taken from another angle. If there is one, there is. How do you know? Because Edwin Mercer spent 20 years searching for it. I grabbed my coat. Before I reached the door, Wolfe added, and find out who owned the camera. I turned. The newspaper photographer? No. The original photographer? Yes. Why? Because if the photograph was altered, we must know who had access to it. Kramer stood. You're assuming it was altered. Wolfe looked at him. Inspector. Yes. The man across the street resembles Charles Haynes. Yes. Charles Haynes disappeared 30 years ago. Apparently. Edwin Mercer died 4 days ago. Yes, the damaged photograph was delivered to Mr. Avery. Yes. And last night someone telephoned warning that the man was watching me. Kramer nodded. Wolfe folded his hands. There are too many coincidences. I smiled. You've always said there are no coincidences. I said there are few. What's the difference? Few can still kill you. That evening I returned to the archive with a new request. The archivist brought out another box. Inside were photographs from the Harrison Wharf transfer. 3 angles, 3 negatives. One showed the warehouse from the street. One showed the loading dock. The third showed the men from farther to the east. The third photograph was the one Wolfe had predicted. I studied it. The men were visible. The warehouse, the plaque, the loading doors. But most important was what appeared through an open doorway behind them. A man, standing inside, watching the group. Not Charles Haynes, not Jonathan Vale, not Edwin Mercer, someone else. A younger man, his face partly hidden by shadow, and beside him on a table lay a ledger, a large ledger. Its cover bore a number, 27. I photographed it. Then I noticed something written beneath the image, a notation from the photographer. Second exposure, requested by Mercer. My heart began beating faster. Edwin Mercer had been there. He had commissioned the second photograph. He had known there was something inside the warehouse, and he had spent 20 years trying to identify Charles Haynes. But perhaps Charles Haynes had never been the person Mercer wanted to find. Perhaps he had been the person Mercer wanted to find first. I hurried back to the brownstone. Wolfe was waiting. I placed the photograph before him. He studied it for perhaps 30 seconds. Then he looked up. Excellent. You say that too often. Not often enough. Kramer leaned over his shoulder. Who's the man in the doorway? I don't know. Avery stared at the image. I've seen that face. I turned. Where? He pointed toward the photograph. Not there. Where among? Mr. Mercer's papers. Wolfe's eyes sharpened. Describe him. Avery swallowed. He appeared in another photograph. Where? An old family gathering. Who was he? I don't know. Was the photograph damaged? Avery looked at him. Yes. How? The corner had been cut away. Silence. Wolfe leaned back. The faintest trace of satisfaction appeared in his eyes. Then we have found our pattern. I looked at the 2 photographs. 2 missing corners, 2 altered images. 1 dead man, 1 vanished man, and 1 figure beneath a street lamp who appeared every evening outside Wolfe's brownstone. For the first time, I wondered whether the watcher was not trying to get into the house at all. Perhaps he was waiting for something to come out. Chapter 3. The name written in the margin. The trouble with old photographs is that they never forget anything. People do. Photographs do not. They may fade, crack, curl, stain, lose their corners, or spend 40 years in a drawer beneath a pair of socks. But if a man once stood in front of a camera, the photograph has no sympathy for his later disappearance. That morning I had 3 photographs spread across my desk, and 1 name bothering me more than all the others. Daniel Reed. The name had not appeared in the photograph. It had not appeared in the newspaper caption. It had not appeared in the property records I had examined. It had appeared only as pressure beneath an erased pencil notation. That was enough for Nero Wolfe. He had a talent for respecting things most people regarded as accidents. I found him upstairs in the plant rooms shortly after 9, standing before a tray of orchids with a magnifying glass in one hand and a pair of silver forceps in the other. You're needed. I am always needed. You know what I mean. We have a name. He looked at me. Who's? Daniel Reed. The forceps stopped. How obtained? Pressure marks beneath an erased notation. Good. You say that before I explain. You would not interrupt me for a bad name. That's flattering. It is not. He placed the forceps carefully beside the orchid tray. Come downstairs. That was the first time I knew Daniel Reed mattered. Not because Wolfe had recognized the name. He hadn't. Because he had recognized the method. Someone had written a name. Someone had erased it. Someone had then gone to considerable trouble to make the erasure appear complete. That meant the name had once mattered enough to remove. And in my experience, people rarely erase names because they have become unimportant. The office had already been arranged for an investigation. Wolfe's desk contained the 3 photographs, the property records, the newspaper clippings, and a magnifying glass. The breakfast tray had been cleared. Fritz had left coffee. I poured myself a cup. Tell me again, Wolfe said. The warehouse was owned by Westbridge Development. Was. Failed construction company. Controlled by? 4 men. Names. Edwin Mercer. Charles Harlan. George Bell. Richard Sloane. All dead? Mercer died 4 days ago. Bell 14 years ago. Sloane 8 years ago. Harlan disappeared 29 years ago. Convenient. You say that about everyone. Because everyone makes it necessary. I pointed to the photograph. The 4 men were connected to the warehouse. Yes. Versa later spent 20 years trying to identify Charles. Possibly. Now we have Daniel Reed, a surveyor, who supposedly disappeared from New York. Supposedly. The records say he left. Did he? I don't know. Wolfe leaned back. And the photograph. I handed him the enlarged copy. Look beside the lower margin. He examined it. The erased notation, yes. Describe the process. I don't know the technical details. Then learn them. I had an archivist examine it. And, he said the pencil was removed carefully. Not rubbed out. Scraped, then cleaned. Interesting. There were pressure marks. Made by? The original writing. What survived? Daniel Reed. Wolfe's gaze remained on the photograph. How certain. Very good. He placed the photograph beside the newspaper version. Why would a surveyor's name be written beside a photograph of businessmen? Because he was there. That is one possibility. Because he took the photograph. Another. Because he surveyed the warehouse. Another. Because he knew something, most likely. I sat down. What do you think? I think the erasure is more important than the name. Why? Because a name can be written by mistake. Daniel Reed, perhaps. But an erasure is deliberate. Exactly. He tapped the photograph. Someone wanted us to see the 4 men, while not seeing the 5th or the 6th. I looked at him. 6th, the man in the doorway. The photograph from the previous evening lay between us. The warehouse, the 4 men, Charles Haynes, Edwin Mercer, and the shadowed figure inside. Wolfe pointed. We have been counting visible men. Yes, we should count the people who were intended to remain invisible. I looked again. Reed, perhaps. You think Daniel Reed was the man in the doorway? I do not opinion. I have several. Would you like to share one? I am conserving accuracy. The history of Westbridge development began in the sort of prosperity that newspaper reporters call promising and accountants call temporary. Founded 29 years before the warehouse photograph was taken, the company specialized in commercial construction. Small factories, storage buildings, apartment blocks, office renovations. Nothing glamorous, nothing suspicious. Its 4 principal men were Edwin Mercer, financial manager, Charles Harlan, president, George Bell, legal counsel, and Richard Sloan, operations director. The company expanded rapidly, too rapidly. Within 6 years it controlled property in 3 states. Within 8, it collapsed. The official reason was insolvency. That word appeared in every surviving newspaper account. Insolvency. It was a useful word. It explained everything and nothing. I spent the next 4 hours chasing Westbridge through directories, tax records, court filings, trade journals, and old newspapers. The company had built several warehouses around New York. Most were demolished. A few had been converted. One burned. Another was still standing. But the Harrison Wharf property had been different. It had been purchased under a complicated arrangement involving 3 corporations. The first corporation belonged to Westbridge. The second appeared to belong to an investment group. The third had no obvious connection to either, and the final transfer had occurred 3 weeks before Westbridge announced financial difficulties. I copied the details. Then I found something else. A survey. The Harrison Wharf property had been measured twice. The first survey had been prepared by Daniel Reed. The second had been prepared by someone named William Crowe. Reed's survey was dated September 11. Crowe's was dated September 19. The warehouse photograph had been taken September 18. The second survey changed the property boundary by 6 feet. 6 feet did not sound like much, but on a commercial lot, 6 feet could mean a substantial difference in ownership, especially if a loading corridor, access road, or adjoining parcel was involved. I telephoned the Surveyors Association. Daniel Reed had been licensed in New York. He had worked independently. His records were clean. His address was listed on West 22nd Street. Then, after October of that year, nothing. No license renewal, no tax records, no new address, no death certificate, no marriage, no property, no professional correspondence. He had simply ceased existing. I returned to the brownstone with the information. Wolfe listened while eating a lunch of roast chicken, buttered peas, and a potato dish that Fritz had apparently invented specifically to remind the human race that potatoes possessed possibilities. When I finished, Wolfe wiped his mouth. Daniel Reed disappeared after the second survey? No, after the photograph. Yes. How long? 8 days. Interesting. Everything is interesting to you. No. Most things are tedious. What do you think happened? I think you should continue. That is not an answer. It is the correct answer, I sighed. What about the 6 feet? Wolfe looked up. You care about that. Very much. Why? Because 6 feet can move a boundary. Exactly, and a boundary can move ownership. Exactly, and ownership can move motive. I smiled. You could have said that hours ago. I could have. Why didn't you? Because you had not yet earned it. That afternoon I went to Harrison Wharf. The warehouse itself had long since vanished. In its place stood a parking structure belonging to a company whose employees had never heard of Westbridge development. The old street grid had changed. New buildings occupied the surrounding blocks, yet the original property boundary remained visible in one curious place. A narrow strip of brick pavement ran between 2 modern buildings, 6 feet wide, exactly 6 feet. It had survived because it connected an older loading access route to the river. I stood there smoking. A city employee named Victor Lang stopped beside me. Looking for something? That's expensive, I've noticed. Old warehouse? Yes, you missed it by about 20 years. I know, he pointed down the passage. That used to be the loading lane. Westbridge? You know the name. Some. My grandfather worked here. That caught my attention. At the warehouse? Yes. What did he do? Maintenance. Did he ever mention Daniel Reed? Victor frowned. That name sounds familiar. Why? My grandfather kept old papers. Where? At home. Do you still have them? Some. Could I see them? He hesitated. I don't know. Tell him you're helping a historian. Are you? I've been accused of worse. He smiled. Come tomorrow. I gave him my card. Then I walked the 6-foot passage again. At the far end, an old brick wall remained from the original warehouse foundation. Someone had painted over an old number. I scraped away the paint with my fingernail. A faded 27 emerged. 27 Harrison Wharf. The same number appearing in the photograph. The same number associated with the ledger I had seen inside the doorway. I stood there longer than necessary. Then I noticed something else. A small metal plate had been set into the wall. No words. Only 4 initials. WDC West Development Company. The plate had been covered by paint, not removed. Covered. That was the sort of thing Wolfe liked. Things that had been concealed without being destroyed. The next morning, Victor Lang brought me a cardboard box. My grandfather's. We met in a coffee shop near the river. The box contained receipts, employment papers, photographs, and a small notebook. I turned the notebook over. The first pages contained routine maintenance notes. Broken pipe. Damaged loading door. Electrical fault. Then September 18, the handwriting changed. Mr. Reed came before the others. I stopped. Next line. He said the boundary was wrong. Next, Mr. Harlan told him to keep quiet. Next, Mercer argued. Next, Bell locked the office. Next, Sloan took the ledger upstairs. I looked at Victor. Do you know what this means? No. I turned another page. The next entry had been written in heavier pencil. Mr. Reed said the 6 feet belonged to someone else. Below it, he said he had proof. Then, they told him there would be no meeting. After dark, Reed did not leave. The page ended there. I closed the notebook. Your grandfather witnessed this? Apparently. Did he say what happened? Never. Why? Victor shrugged. Maybe he was afraid. I looked at the box again. At the bottom was an envelope. I opened it. Inside lay a small brass key. A tag hung from it. 27B, I stared. Did you know about this? Victor shook his head. No. I put the key in my pocket. Back at the brownstone, Wolfe listened without interruption. When I placed the notebook and key before him, he became very still. The 4 men. Yes. Reed, yes. The boundary. 6 feet. The ledger. Taken upstairs. The photograph. Taken the same day. Wolfe looked at the key. 27B. Any idea? Not yet. You know what I think? No. I think Reed discovered the company was stealing property. Perhaps. I think the 4 men confronted him. Possibly. I think something happened that night. Almost certainly. And I think the missing corner of the photograph was cut away because Reed was in it. That is your theory. You don't agree. It is incomplete. What's missing? The reason Mercer spent 20 years looking for him. I considered that. Maybe Mercer wanted to know whether Reed survived. Why? Because he felt guilty? Possibly. Or because Reed had evidence? More likely. What evidence? Wolfe glanced toward the photograph. The ledger. Still missing. Yes, and the 6-foot boundary. Yes, the altered survey. And Daniel Reed. Yes. He leaned back. Everything returns to the same evening. I nodded. The evening of the photograph. The evening before Westbridge's collapse. The evening Reed disappeared. Precisely. I looked toward the window. It was late afternoon. Rain had begun tapping against the glass. For a few minutes the city seemed unusually quiet. Then Wolfe said, "Tonight, Mr. Goodwin, you will watch the street." I was planning to. No. You've changed your mind? I have changed your assignment. From watching him to what? Watching where he goes. You told me not to follow him. I did. And now? You will not follow him. I stared. Then how do I watch where he goes? Observe. From here, yes. That's not very useful. It will be. He returned to his book. I knew better than to argue. At 8:40 the figure appeared. Same street lamp, same coat, same hat, same stillness. Had stopped. The pavement shone under the streetlights. I stood behind the curtain. Wolfe sat behind me. For 20 minutes the man did nothing. At 8:59 he looked toward the office. At 9:01 he turned. At 9:02 he crossed the street. I moved toward the door. Wolfe's voice stopped me. Wait. The man approached our brownstone. He did not climb the steps. He stopped beside the iron fence. His right hand went into his coat. I watched. He removed a small object, bent down, placed it beneath the fence. Then he straightened. He looked toward the second-floor window, our window. He raised one hand, not a wave. The same signal. Then he walked away. I waited until he reached the corner. Now? Wolfe nodded. I went downstairs. The street was empty. I crossed to the fence. Something lay beneath it, a small metal cylinder. About the length of my little finger, I picked it up. No label, no markings. I returned upstairs. Wolfe took it. It is locked, obviously. Key? I removed the brass key from my pocket, 27B. He examined both. The key fit. The cylinder opened. Inside was a narrow strip of paper. No message. Only a sequence of numbers. And beneath them, Reed. I looked at Wolfe. That's all? No. He turned the paper over. There, written in faint pencil, was another line. He never left the warehouse. I felt a chill. That's impossible. Wolfe's expression had become very hard. Nothing is impossible. The warehouse was demolished. Yes. Reed disappeared. Yes. So how could he still be there? Wolfe looked toward the window. The street lamp stood empty. The question, he said, is not where Daniel Reed went. He placed the paper beside the photograph. It is what happened before anyone believed he had gone. I stared at the erased name. Daniel Reed. The surveyor who vanished. The man who had challenged 6 feet of property. The man whose name somebody had tried to remove. And now a stranger who looked remarkably like one of the men from the old photograph had just left us a message claiming Reed had never left the warehouse. I said, Wolfe, if the man outside is Charles Haynes. Yes, then he's been alive all these years, apparently. And if Daniel Reed never left the warehouse, Wolfe looked at me. Then someone has spent 30 years making us believe he did. I looked again at the strip of paper. The final line seemed darker than before. He never left the warehouse. For the first time, I understood why the figure across the street had never approached our door. He had not been trying to get inside. He had been waiting for us to discover what was already there. And somewhere in the old foundations of Harrison Wharf, beneath 6 feet of disputed ground and 30 years of lies, a missing man was beginning to acquire a name again. Chapter 4. The envelope beneath the fence. The envelope was not the sort of object that inspires confidence. It was small, yellowed, and soft at the corners, as though it had spent 30 years being carried in pockets belonging to men who preferred not to be noticed. The paper had once been white. Now it was the color of old bone. The brass key was inside. So was the strip of paper. 3 numbers, 3517-4, that was all. No name, no address, no explanation. I had learned by then that explanations were the one commodity the Harcourt people had never been willing to provide. Wolfe examined the envelope under the green desk lamp. He had sent for Kramer. That alone told me he considered the matter serious. Where exactly did you find it? Wolfe asked. Beneath the iron fence. The object? Inside the envelope. The envelope was sealed? No. The key was wrapped? No. The paper? Folded. Anything else? No, he nodded. Good. You're pleased. I am never pleased by evidence. Yesterday I was interested. Today I am hungry. Fritz entered at that moment with a breakfast tray, which meant the distinction was probably more important to Wolfe than it was to me. He set down eggs, grilled tomatoes, toast and coffee. I looked at the brass key again. 35, 17, 4. Wolfe ate. Yes. Several. Would you like to share one? No, of course. The front doorbell rang. Kramer. I went downstairs. He entered without removing his hat. You found something. I always find something. Don't play games. I'm not. He followed me upstairs. Wolfe pointed toward the chair. Inspector. Kramer sat. I handed him the envelope. He examined it. Where did you get this? Under the fence? From the watcher? Presumably. We didn't ask him. Kramer looked toward Wolfe. You're telling me you let him walk away? Yes. You could have stopped him. I could have. Why didn't you? Because I preferred the envelope. Kramer muttered something about detectives and common sense. Then he looked at the strip of paper. 35, 17, 4. Exactly. Street, building, room, possibly. Or date. 3 numbers are wonderfully flexible. Kramer handed it back. What about the key? We haven't identified it. Then identify it, I smiled. Excellent suggestion. He glared at me. You want to keep your teeth, Goodwin? I've grown attached to them. Wolfe lifted one hand. Enough. We stopped. He looked at the key. Mr. Goodwin. Yes? Where did you find the brass key? Yeah, in the box from Victor Lang. Yes, the maintenance worker's grandfather? Yes. Did the tag say 27B? Yes, and the envelope. Tag. Yet both appeared in connection with the same property. Correct. Wolfe turned to Kramer. Inspector, I believe we should investigate Westbridge Development's remaining properties. Kramer stared. You have a property list? Mr. Goodwin has one. I looked at my notebook. Westbridge owned 27 properties at its peak. How many remain? 5. How many abandoned? 2. Start with those. The first abandoned Westbridge property stood on East 43rd Street. It had once been a storage building. Now it was a grey brick shell surrounded by chain fencings and weeds. The city had condemned it 11 years earlier. Kramer brought 2 detectives. I brought a flashlight. Wolfe stayed home. That was no surprise. He regarded abandoned buildings as a form of architecture designed specifically to inconvenience him. The brass key proved useless. The lock on the main entrance was modern. The rear door had been welded shut. We entered through a broken loading window. Inside, the building smelled of damp wood, rust, and the particular dust produced by places that had been abandoned before anyone had finished emptying them. Kramer looked at the strip of paper. 35, maybe floor 35. Not likely. Room 35. Possibly. Cabinet 17, you're guessing. That's my profession. We searched the first floor. Nothing. Second. Nothing. Basement. Nothing. At the end of the basement stood a row of old metal cabinets. Most had been emptied. One remained locked. Its brass plate was stamped. 17. I looked at Kramer. He looked at me. Well, I produced the key. It fit. The lock turned. The cabinet door opened. Inside was a single leather-bound book. Nothing else. No papers, no money, no weapons. Just a book. I lifted it carefully. The cover bore no title. Its spine was cracked. Dust covered the upper edge. But the pages inside were remarkably clean. Kramer whistled. Survey book. I opened it. Every page contained measurements, street widths, property lines, building setbacks, lot dimensions, coordinates. The handwriting varied from page to page. Some entries had been crossed out, others rewritten. Several measurements had been changed in pencil. Kramer leaned over my shoulder. That's what we came for. I think so. Looks like a bookkeeper's nightmare. I turned another page. A map unfolded from the rear cover. Manhattan. Not the modern Manhattan, an older one. The streets were familiar, but the property boundaries differed. Several blocks had been divided into colored sections. Numbers appeared beside them. I recognized some. Westbridge properties. Look. Kramer leaned closer. What's that? These lots. He pointed. Why are they marked twice original boundaries? And the second, revised measurements. I compared them. 6 feet, 4 feet, 8 feet, sometimes 12. Small alterations. Individually insignificant, collectively substantial. Kramer frowned. Who benefited? I traced the changed boundaries. Every alteration increased the value of adjoining property, and every adjoining property belonged to one group, 3 investment companies, all controlled through different names, but sharing the same legal representative, George Bell. I looked at Kramer, the lawyer, Westbridge's lawyer. Yes, and the investors, the same investors. Kramer turned a page. That's fraud. Probably. We need proof. I continued reading. The alterations were dated over a period of 3 years. Each one appeared beside a notation: resurvey requested, boundary correction, access adjustment. Each sounded harmless. Together they formed a systematic transfer of land. 6 feet here, 8 feet there. A narrow strip removed from one parcel, another added to another. Nothing dramatic, nothing that would attract attention, until the final map. One property had been crossed out completely, not altered, not transferred, removed. The parcel number remained, but the property itself had vanished from the official sequence. I checked the corresponding page. Blank, not missing, blank, as though the property had never existed. Kramer said, "What is it?" I traced the old map number. I looked at the 17-4-35. Then I pointed to the map. Property 35. Kramer frowned. And 17, the cabinet. 4? I turned the survey book. At the bottom of the page containing property 35 appeared a handwritten note. 4th revision. I stared. The 3 numbers were not an address. They were instructions. Property 35, cabinet 17. Revision 4. Kramer exhaled slowly. Someone wanted us to find this. Yes. Who? I looked at the old map. I think the man under the street lamp. We carried the survey book back to the brownstone. Wolfe was in the office, seated behind his desk, with the windows open to the evening air. The orchids upstairs had been watered. Fritz had prepared dinner. The city outside was beginning to glow. Wolfe listened as I explained. He said nothing until the survey book lay open before him. Then he studied the map. How many altered boundaries? 23. All benefiting the same investors. Yes. How many original owners? 17. How many lost property? 7. How many gained? 3. Investment companies. Connected through George Bell, Westbridge's attorney. Yes. Wolfe nodded. The pattern is elegant. Fraud is elegant now, when done properly. Kramer snorted. There's nothing elegant about stealing land. The theft is not elegant. Wolfe touched the map. The method is. I sat down. What do you see? An operation designed to remain invisible. Explain. Each alteration is too small to attract attention. 6 feet, 4, 8. Individually insignificant, but, together, substantial. Exactly. Kramer folded his arms. Why did they remove property 35? That is the important question. Could be a clerical error. No. How do you know? Because the 4th revision references it. He pointed to the note. Someone was still working on it. I looked at the blank page. Then why erase it? Because the property became inconvenient. How? Perhaps it contained evidence or value. Both are possible, Kramer said. Who owned it? Wolfe looked at me. I checked the survey records. The name was gone. No owner, no transfer, no sale, nothing. Only an old parcel number, 35. Then Wolfe asked, "Where is it?" I traced the original map. The parcel sat near the western edge of the old warehouse district. I followed the street lines. Then I stopped. Wolfe. It isn't near Harrison Wharf. No, it's here, I pointed. West 35th Street. Kramer leaned over the map. You're kidding. No. I traced the boundary again. Property 35 had occupied land directly across from the brownstone. The current buildings had been constructed over it. But the old boundary line ran beneath the street, under our street, under the pavement, and the old parcel extended toward the very block where Nero Wolfe's brownstone stood. I looked at Wolfe. He was motionless. The watcher, I said. Yes, he's not watching the house, not primarily. He's watching the property. Wolfe nodded. The missing property. Kramer looked irritated. How does a man standing across the street know where a property boundary used to be? Because he has reason to. Who? Wolfe did not answer. He studied the map, then the photograph, then the survey book. Finally he said, someone wants us to remember property 35. That night the figure returned, 8:40. Same street lamp, same coat, same hat. I stood beside Wolfe at the office window. Kramer was downstairs with 2 officers. The watcher stood across the street. He looked toward the brownstone, then toward the pavement, then back toward the house. Wolfe watched him carefully. He knows. Knows what? That we found it. Property 35. Yes. At 8:52 the figure moved. Only one step. At 8:55 another. At 8:59 he stopped. Then he raised his hand, the same signal. Wolfe did not move. Neither did I. At 9:04 the man turned. This time he did not leave immediately. He stood beneath the lamp and looked directly toward the office. Then he touched the brim of his hat. A gesture of acknowledgement. At 9:05 he disappeared around the corner. Kramer came upstairs. He's gone. Yes. Did he leave anything? No. Then what was the point? Wolfe looked at the old map. He wanted us to know he knows. That he knows what? That we found the property. Kramer stared. Why would that matter? Wolfe answered without looking up. Because whoever owns property 35 owns something worth recovering. What? I don't know. Documents? Possibly. Evidence? Almost certainly. Kramer rubbed his jaw. Then we searched the old property. It no longer exists. Everything exists somewhere. Wolfe looked at him. That is a useful police principle. Thank you. It is also incorrect. Kramer grunted. I picked up the survey book. There's something else. What? The fourth revision. Wolfe turned. The note. Yes. The surveyor who made it was not Daniel Reed. No. Who? I checked the handwriting records. The name appeared on the inside cover. Daniel Reed. Kramer swore softly. Wolfe leaned back. So. I looked at the survey book. Reed didn't disappear because of the warehouse. No. He disappeared because of the survey. Precisely. And property 35. The missing property. Wolfe's eyes shifted toward the dark window. The reason our watcher stands across the street, Kramer said. Then we're close. Wolfe corrected him. No. He closed the survey book. We have only found the place, not the reason. Not yet. Outs, West 35th Street remained quiet. The street lamp burned steadily. The watcher was gone. But the empty pavement no longer looked empty to me. Beneath it lay an erased property. Beneath that property lay 30 years of altered measurements. And somewhere in the records of a vanished company was the name of a surveyor who had apparently disappeared. Daniel Reed. The man who had measured 6 feet. The man who had challenged Westbridge. The man whose name had been erased. The man who had never truly left. Chapter 5. The man who was supposed to be gone. At 8:40 that evening, I was not watching the street. That was because the man across the street had already come inside. He was sitting in Nero Wolfe's office. It was one of those developments that makes a man reconsider the value of routine. At 8:37 I had been downstairs checking the front lock. At 8:38 the bell had rung. At 8:39 I had opened the door. At 8:40 the man who had spent 9 evenings beneath a street lamp was standing in the hallway with his hat in his hand. At 8:41 I had decided that either I had become careless or the universe had. Wolfe, naturally, had remained calm. He had not even looked surprised. The stranger had said, "My name is Daniel Reed." I had stared at him. He had stared back. Then Wolfe had said, "Come upstairs." That was how we reached 8:42. By 8:03 I had locked the front door. By 8:44 I had checked the street, empty. By 8:45 Inspector Kramer was on his way. By 8:46 Daniel Reed was sitting opposite Wolfe, and by 8:47 I had decided that I wanted a drink. I did not get one. Wolfe was examining Reed. Not his clothes, not his face, his hands. Reed's hands were long and lean, with the roughened fingertips of a man accustomed to pencils, measuring instruments, and paper. He looked perhaps 60. His hair was mostly grey. His face was thinner than the photograph suggested. But there was no mistaking him. The man in the doorway of the old warehouse photograph. The name beneath the erased pencil marks. The surveyor who had supposedly disappeared. Daniel Reed. "You were expected to be dead," I said. Reed smiled faintly. "Not dead, disappeared. Yes. 30 years, 29 years and 11 months. You're particular. I had to be." Wolfe folded his hands. "Why come now?" Reed looked toward the window. "Because Mr. Mercer is dead." "That is not an answer. It is the beginning of one." "Begin." Reed looked at him. "Edwin Mercer was not my enemy." I glanced at the survey book on Wolfe's desk. "That's not what the record suggests. The records are wrong. Convenient. Very." His voice remained calm. I knew Mercer before Westbridge became successful. You worked with him. I surveyed their properties. Then you knew Charles Harlan, George Bell, and Richard Sloane. What happened? Reed's eyes settled on the map. They discovered that land could be stolen without moving a single stone. Wolfe said nothing. Reed continued. A wall does not need to move. A boundary line does. That sounded like something Wolfe might have said. I noticed he did not object. Westbridge acquired distressed properties, Reed said. At least that was the public story. They would purchase parcels from owners who needed money. Then they would commission surveys. From you, at first, and the measurements were changed. By whom? Not me. Then who? Bell. The lawyer? Yes. How? Paperwork. Reed leaned forward. That was the clever part. They never simply changed ownership. They changed boundaries first. I looked at the survey book. 6 feet, sometimes 4, sometimes 8, sometimes, and property 35. Reed's expression changed, only slightly, but enough. That was different. Why? Because they couldn't alter it. Why not? Because they didn't own it. The room became quiet. Wolfe's eyes narrowed. Who did? Reed looked at him. That is the question Edwin Mercer spent 20 years trying to answer. I sat back. Mercer knew. He eventually did. Then why did he hire you? He didn't. Who did? The original owner name. Reed hesitated. Jonathan Wainwright. I frowned. The Wainwright firm? Yes. The name meant something. Not from the current investigation, from the photograph. The photograph Daniel Kerr had brought us. Martin Wainwright. The dead man who supposedly wasn't dead. I looked at Reed. You knew the Wainwrights. I surveyed their property. Property 35? Part of it. Then why was it removed from the records? Because Westbridge needed it. For what? A passage. 6 feet wide? Exactly. The old 6-foot boundary suddenly became something more than an accounting irregularity. A passage. A strip of land. A route through the warehouse district, Reed continued. Property 35 was narrow. It ran behind several buildings and connected 2 streets. An access lane. Yes. Why was it valuable? It provided access to the river. That sounds useful. It was more than useful. What? It controlled the only legal route by which certain properties could receive heavy freight. I looked at the map. Westbridge had not been stealing land for the sake of land. They had been acquiring access. A 6-foot strip could determine whether an entire warehouse remained commercially useful, Wolfe said. And the Wainwrights owned the strip. Legally, Westbridge wanted it. Desperately. Why didn't they buy it? They tried. The Wainwrights refused. Why? They knew what it was worth. Reed paused. And because they had already promised it to another company. Which one? A rival developer. I looked at Wolfe. That complicated everything. Westbridge couldn't allow that. No. So they altered the surrounding boundaries. Yes. To make the strip appear part of their property. That was the intention. But the original survey contradicted it. Mine did, which is why you disappeared. Reed's expression hardened. Which is why I was made to disappear. The doorbell rang. I went downstairs. Kramer stood on the stoop with 2 detectives. Where is he? Upstairs, alive? Very, Daniel Reed, that's what he says. Kramer entered. Does he have identification? No. Then he isn't Daniel Reed. You'll enjoy explaining that to Wolfe. I've explained worse. We went upstairs. Kramer stopped when he saw Reed. For several seconds, neither man moved. Then Kramer said, "Where the hell have you been?" Reed smiled. "That is a long story. I've got time." Wolfe looked at the inspector. "You have already interrupted the beginning." Kramer took a chair. "Then continue." Reed looked at him. "Inspector, I did not kill Edwin Mercer." Kramer nodded. "I wasn't going to accuse you. You were thinking it. I was thinking a great many things. I have no reason to kill him. You had 29 years. I had 29 years to remain alive. That's a better reason." Kramer looked toward Wolfe. "So he's Reed?" Wolfe answered. "I believe so." "Ask him." Kramer turned. "Name? Daniel Reed. Occupation? Surveyor? Former? Always. Address? How have you lived? Carefully." Kramer grunted. "That isn't an occupation." "No." "Where were you?" Reed hesitated. "Pennsylvania." "All this mostly under your own name?" "No." "Whose?" "I used several." Kramer looked irritated. "Convenient. Necessary. Why return?" Reed glanced at Wolfe. "Because Mercer left instructions." "With whom?" "Thomas Avery." Kramer nodded. "His lawyer." "Yes, and the photograph. Mercer wanted Wolfe to see it." "Why?" "Because Wolfe would understand the missing corner." I smiled. "We've been working hard on that." Reed looked at me. Too hard. Excuse me? The photograph was never meant to identify me. Then what was it for? To show the others? Mercer, Harlan, Bell, Sloan, yes. Why? Because they were the men who altered the boundaries. I looked at the 4 names. Mercer included? Reed nodded. Edwin Mercer was involved. But you said he wasn't your enemy. He wasn't at first. What changed? Nothing. That answer stopped me. Reed looked at Wolfe. Mercer joined the scheme, then regretted it. Years later. Too late? Much too late, Kramer said. How much did he know? Everything. And he spent 20 years trying to fix it. Yes. Why not go to the police? Reed gave a tired smile. Because by then the evidence was gone. All of it? No. What survived? One survey. The one in the cabinet. Yes. And the original title records. Somewhere. Reed looked toward the window. That is why I was watching your house. I sat forward. You were watching Wolfe because of the missing property? Yes. Not because you wanted to harm him? No. Then why stand outside every evening? Because I wanted to know who was watching him. I stared. You knew someone was watching us, before you knew. Who? I don't know. Then how could you tell? Because the same car appeared 3 nights in a row. I frowned. What car? Black sedan. Lines? I couldn't read it. Driver? Never visible. Where? Across the street from the brownstone. I looked at Wolfe. He had said nothing about a car. Reed continued. Then the car disappeared. When? The night Avery arrived.
So you stayed?
Yes. Why? Because whoever was following the investigation would assume the case had become active. Kramer leaned forward. And you were watching the watcher? Yes. Why not tell us? Because I didn't know which side you were on. Kramer looked offended. I'm the police. That is not always reassuring. I nearly laughed. Kramer did not go on. Reed folded his hands. I watched the house because I knew what happened to Mercer. Someone killed him? No. Then what? Someone frightened him. Who? I don't know. You're very fond of those words. I've spent 30 years not knowing, Wolfe said quietly. Who knew you were alive? Reed's eyes shifted toward him. Very few. Mercer? Yes, Harlan? I don't know. Bell knows. Sloan? I believe so. Why? Because he saw me. When? The night I disappeared. Kramer leaned closer. Tell us. Reed looked at the photograph on the desk. It was September 18, the photograph. Yes. The day of the warehouse meeting. Yes. The 4 men were there. Yes. You. Who else? Jonathan Wainwright. I looked up. The owner, his representative. What happened? Reed took a breath. I had completed the original survey. The one showing the 6-foot strip belonged to Wainwright. Yes. Westbridge wanted you to change it. Bell asked. You refused. Immediately. What did he say? That everyone has a price. What did you say? That some measurements are not negotiable. I smiled. Wolfe did not. Reed continued. The next day Harlan came to my office. Alos? Yes. What did he want? My survey. Did he threaten you? Not directly. How? He told me the company could ruin me. Could they? Could. Then I still refused. What happened? That evening I was followed. By whom? I don't know. How long? 3 days. Then, the 4th night, I went to the warehouse. Why? Because Mercer asked me to meet him. Alone? Yes. Was he? No. Reed's eyes hardened. Harlan, Bell, and Sloan were waiting. And Mercer, he was there. What did they want? The original survey. You refused. Again. Then, they showed me a document. What document? A transfer agreement. Property 35. Yes. It claimed the Wainwrights had sold it. They had not. For us? Yes. Could you prove it? I could prove the survey contradicted it, which was enough. It was enough to expose them. So they had to remove you. Yes. How? They gave me a choice, Kramer said. What choice? Leave the country, or be charged with fraud. On what grounds? They had forged my signature on a revised survey. I looked at the survey book, the 4th revision. Yes, they intended to blame you. Completely. Did Mercer participate? Reed closed his eyes. He signed one of the documents, I said. Then how can you say he wasn't your enemy? Because afterward he came to me. When? That night. After the others left? Yes. What did he say? Reed's voice softened. He said he was sorry. That's all he said. He had made a terrible mistake. Then he told me to disappear. Why? Because Harlan had already arranged everything. Police would believe the paperwork. News would believe the police. Your clients would believe the newspapers. So you left. I had no choice. You went to Pennsylvania, eventually, and remained hidden. Yes. Why not expose them later? Reed looked toward Wolfe. Because I did not possess enough. The survey? They had copies, the original? I kept it. Where? Reed did not answer. Kramer leaned forward. Mr. Reed, no. Where is it? Reed looked at Wolfe. I will tell him. Kramer gave an exasperated sound. You know, I am beginning to understand why Wolfe likes you. Wolfe said, I do not like him. Reed smiled. That is reassuring. Wolfe reached for the survey book, the cabinet. Reed nodded. You knew it was there. Yes. Why? I put it there. I looked at him. You hid the survey book? The original. But it contains alterations. Copies. Why would you leave it? So someone would find it. After 30 years? I expected it to be found sooner. You sent the key, yes. Through the watch. I was the watcher, I know. Then you know why? I shook my head. No, Reed leaned forward. Because I needed someone intelligent enough to recognize what the measurements meant. I looked at Wolfe. That would be him. Yes. 35 property. 17. Cabinet. 4 revision. Exactly. Wolfe nodded. The message beneath the fence was meant for you. The line about Reed never leaving the warehouse. Not written by me. I looked at him sharply. Then who? I don't know. There it was again. That phrase. I don't know. But this time it did not sound evasive. It sounded frightened. Wolfe noticed it too. You did not place that message in the cylinder. No, who did? I don't know. Then someone else knows you are alive. Reed nodded. Yes. Who? I believe it is someone connected with Westbridge. Kramer stood. Then we're not finished. No. Wolfe looked toward him. We are not finished. The room remained silent. The pieces were beginning to align. Westbridge development. 4 men. A stolen boundary. Property 35. A surveyor who refused to falsify measurements. A forged document. A disappearance. A dead Edwin Mercer. A photograph with its corner removed. A second photograph with the same deliberate mutilation. A key. A cabinet. Book. A watcher. And someone else watching the watcher. I said. There's something I don't understand. Wolfe looked at me. Several things. Why did Mercer wait 20 years? Reed answered. He didn't. I turned. What? He began searching immediately. But the records say 20 years. He searched publicly for 20 years. And privately. From the beginning. Why hide it? Because Harlan was still alive. I looked at Kramer. Charles Harlan. Kramer nodded. Disappeared 29 years ago. Exactly, Reed said. Harlan never disappeared. The room went still. Kramer stared. You know where he is? No, but you know he's alive? I saw him when? 3 months ago. Where? New York. I felt the hairs rise on my neck. Why didn't you tell anyone? Because I was not certain. You recognized him? Yes. Then what? He was older, naturally. He had another name. What name? Daniel Crow. Kramer reached for his notebook. Where? Reed gave an address. Kramer wrote it down. Wolfe said nothing. He was studying the photograph again. The men outside the warehouse. The missing corner. The erased name. Then the second photograph. The figure in the doorway. And finally the face of Daniel Reed. He looked up. Mr. Reed. Yes? Why did you come to me tonight? Reed answered immediately. Because I saw the man who was following your house. Who? I don't know his name. Describe him. Grey coat. Age? About 50. Height 6 feet. Face? Thin. Anything distinctive? Reed hesitated. His left hand. What about it? He has 2 fingers missing. I looked at Kramer. Kramer looked at Wolfe. Wolfe's face became very still. Interesting. Why? I asked. Because the man in the second photograph has the same defect. I turned toward the enlarged photograph, the shadowed figure in the warehouse doorway. His hand rested on the table. 2 fingers were hidden. I had thought it was the angle. It wasn't. Wolfe reached for the photograph. The missing corner. He turned it toward Reed. Was this man there that evening? Reed looked. His face changed. Yes. Who? Reed stood. For the first time since entering the room, his composure broke. I don't know his name, Kramer swore. But I know what he was doing. What? Reed stared at the photograph. He was holding the ledger. The Westbridge ledger? Yes. The one that recorded the real ownership. Yes. Where is it? Reed looked toward the window. That's why I'm here. Why? Because I think he has it. I felt a chill. After 30 years? Reed nodded. Someone has been searching for property 35. Why? Because whoever controls that property controls the proof. Proof of what? Reed looked at Wolfe. That Westbridge never owned it. Wolfe's expression remained calm. And who does? Reed answered. Someone who has been waiting 30 years to claim it. Fritz entered with dinner. For several seconds nobody moved. Then Wolfe said, "Serve Mr. Reed." Reed looked surprised. Kramer laughed. "You've just told us there's a mysterious man with 2 missing fingers carrying 30-year-old evidence, and Wolfe wants to feed you." Wolfe looked offended. "Mr. Reed has been traveling. You're impossible. I am civilized." Dinner was served. Roast beef, Yorkshire pudding, green beans, potatoes prepared with rosemary. For 10 minutes, conversation ceased. That was Wolfe's rule. Food received respect. Even murder suspects occasionally had to wait their turn. When dinner ended, Wolfe wiped his fingers carefully and looked at Reed. "You will remain here tonight." Reed frowned. "Why?" "Because you are safer inside." "From whom?" "That is what we intend to discover." Kramer stood. "I'll put men outside." "No." The inspector stared. "What?" "No uniform." "Why?" "Because whoever is watching us expects police." Kramer frowned. "What do you want?" "Nothing visible." "Then how do I protect the house?" "You don't. I am the police. You are also conspicuous." Kramer looked at me. "He always this pleasant?" Kramer sighed. "Fine." He turned toward the door, then stopped. "Reed." "Yes? If you know anything else, tell me." Reed nodded. "I will." Kramer left. I followed him downstairs. At the door he said quietly, "You believe him?" "Yes." "Why?" "Because Wolfe does." "That's not what I asked." I looked back toward the stairs. "I believe he was frightened." Kramer nodded. "So do I." He stepped onto the stoop, then looked across the street. The street lamp was empty. "Goodwin." "Yes?" "If that man returns tomorrow." "He will." Kramer stared at me. "How do you know?" I smiled. "Because he always does." Upstairs, Wolfe sat behind his desk. Reed stood near the window. He was looking across the street. "You should sleep," Wolfe said. "I have not slept well in 30 years. You will tonight." Reed smiled faintly. "How can you be certain?" "Because whoever frightened you has made one mistake." "What mistake?" "He brought you to me." Reed turned. "I came willingly." "Exactly." Wolfe picked up the photograph. "The others concealed evidence." "Yes." "They erased names." "Yes." "They altered boundaries." "Yes." "They removed properties." "Yes." "But someone has now begun returning the evidence." Reed said. "Nothing." Wolfe placed the photograph down. "That means the old arrangement is collapsing." Reed's expression became troubled. "Or someone wants it to appear that way." Wolfe looked at him. "Very good." I smiled. "You're both getting along." Neither answered. I moved toward the window. For a moment I looked across the street. The street lamp remained empty, but the darkness beyond it seemed occupied. I remembered the cylinder, the message, the missing corner, the shadowed figure, the 2 missing fingers, and the name Daniel Reed, once erased from a photograph, now sitting alive in our office. 30 years ago, Westbridge Development had tried to steal 6 feet of land. They had changed measurements, forged documents, buried a survey, destroyed records, and made a man disappear. But they had overlooked one inconvenient fact. A boundary line can be erased from a file. It can be covered by new construction. It can disappear from a map. But somewhere, sooner or later, somebody remembers where it was. That night, Daniel Reed had finally stepped out of the shadows. The trouble was that another shadow had already taken his place, and whoever stood inside it knew something we did not. He knew where the missing ledger was. He knew why Property 35 had been erased. And judging by the warning beneath our fence, he knew exactly how close Nero Wolfe had come to finding out. Chapter 6. The property that wasn't there. The trouble with a property that does not exist is that it can be remarkably difficult to visit. This was the conclusion I reached at 10 the next morning, after Nero Wolfe had spent nearly 2 hours reconstructing a section of Manhattan that no longer appeared on any modern map. He had 3 city maps spread across his desk. One dated 42 years earlier. One dated 30 years earlier. One current. The old maps were yellow and brittle. The current one was clean, bright, and offensively confident. Wolfe distrusted the current one. I did too. Daniel Reed sat in the red leather chair near the window, watching Wolfe work. He had slept perhaps 3 hours, according to his appearance, but his eyes were clear. Kramer had gone downtown to make inquiries concerning Charles Harlan and the other surviving members of the old Westbridge operation. That left Wolfe, Reed, and me to solve the part that involved geography. Wolfe moved a ruler across the oldest map. Mr. Goodwin, yes? Read the coordinates. I leaned over. Survey point 17. Again, 17 next. Point 35, next point 4. He nodded. The envelope numbers, yes. They were not property cabinet. Revision. No, I told you that theory was excellent. It was. It was also wrong. Thank you. He ignored me. Observe. He placed the 3 maps on top of one another. The first showed a narrow parcel between 2 larger properties. The second showed the same area after Westbridge's revisions. The third showed no parcel at all. Instead, there was one ordinary commercial block. No boundary, no narrow access lane, no property 35. Just a large rectangular lot occupied by a building constructed in the late 1970s. I stared. So they really erased it. From the map, not from the ground, that distinction may become important. Wolfe lifted the ruler. The envelope contained 3 numbers. 35, 17, 4, correct. And you now believe they refer to survey points. Yes. What's the 4th? He pointed to the strip of paper. A tiny mark appeared after the final number. I had overlooked it. It was not a dash. It was a small vertical line. Elevation, Wolfe said. I stared. 4 feet. Exactly. So the message means 3 survey points and an elevation. Yes. Why would anyone send us that? Because someone who knows the original survey expects us to understand it. No, Daniel Reed spoke from the window. I never used those numbers. Wolfe looked at him. Are you certain? Yes. Then who did? Reed shook his head. I don't know, I said. You really should develop a more varied vocabulary. Reed smiled. I've spent 30 years avoiding people. It hasn't improved my conversation. Wolfe returned to the maps. Point 35. He traced a line. Point 17. Another. Point 4. The 3 points formed a triangle. Not a large one, perhaps 30 feet across. The elevation at the center was exactly feet above the original grade. That's the property, I said. No, not the center of the property. What's there now? A commercial building. Which one? Wolfe gave me the address. I wrote it down. How old? Built 38 years ago, after the fraud. Yes. Then what's underneath it? That, Wolfe said, is what you will discover. I sighed. I was afraid you were going to say that. The commercial block occupied nearly half a city block and was exactly as ordinary as Wolfe had promised. It housed a pharmacy, a stationery store, a small accounting office, a sandwich shop, and several businesses whose names I immediately forgot. There was nothing remarkable about it. Nothing old, nothing mysterious, nothing that suggested 30 years of fraud. I walked along the sidewalk while keeping my eyes open for anything that did not belong. The building had been renovated several times. New windows, new doors, new signs, modern brickwork over older foundations. I checked the survey points against the city map. 35, 17, 4. The triangle fell somewhere near the rear corner. There was a narrow service alley behind the commercial block. I entered. Garbage containers stood against one wall. A delivery entrance opened onto the alley. The foundation was visible beneath several layers of newer brick. I crouched. There a line. Not quite a crack. Not quite a joint. A stone block, slightly different from the surrounding foundation. I brushed away dirt. Something had been carved into it. A small symbol. 3 intersecting lines forming a narrow triangle. My pulse quickened. I took out the photograph of Reed's survey book. The mark appeared in the margin beside survey point 4. Exactly the same. I stood. Daniel. He had remained across the street at a safe distance, refusing to enter the commercial building. I waved. He came closer. I pointed. He looked at the stone. For several seconds he said nothing. Then, that's mine. You carved it? No. Then what? I used it. As a survey mark? Yes. Why here? Because the original property corner was here. He touched the stone lightly. This was the northwest point. Of property 35? Yes. But the property is gone. The property is gone from the records. Not the stone, apparently. I examined it. Why 4 feet? Reed crouched. The original grade was 4 feet lower. Than what? Than the foundation. So the elevation. Exactly. I looked toward the building. Someone built over the old property. Yes. Did they know what was underneath? Reed's expression hardened. They knew enough. Who? Westbridge. But the company failed. The people did not. He stood. Harlan Bell, Sloan Mercer. 3 dead, 1 missing. Yes. And now? Now someone is searching again. I looked at him. Why? He stared at the foundation stone. Because the evidence was never destroyed. We returned to the brownstone before noon. Wolfe was still working. He had transferred the old map to a large sheet of paper and was reconstructing the property boundaries by hand. He had drawn streets, blocks, lot lines, survey points. He had marked property 35 in red pencil. I reported the foundation stone. He listened. Reed confirmed it. Yes. Original corner northwest. 4 feet. Then the numbers are complete. I placed the photograph on his desk. There's something else. What? The building was constructed after the fraud. Yes, so someone knew the property existed. Of course. They built over it. Precisely. Why? To conceal it. From whom? Anyone examining the modern records. I looked at the map. That's clever. No, why not? Because concealment requires maintenance. What do you mean? Someone must ensure the old records remain buried until now. He tapped the photograph. The evidence has resurfaced. Possibly, or Reed. Possibly, or someone else. Most likely. I sat down. You're thinking about the man with the missing fingers. I am. He has the ledger. Perhaps. Then why send us the numbers? Because he wants us to find something. The foundation stone. Perhaps. Why? Because he cannot retrieve it himself. Why not? Wolfe looked at me. That is what we must discover. Kramer returned at 2. He looked tired. That meant the morning had been productive. 2 men, he announced. Alive? 1. Wolfe looked up. Names? Arthur Vale and Henry Sloan. I recognized the second name. Richard Sloan's son? Yes. What's he doing? Searching for Reed? Yes. Where? Old Westbridge Properties. How do you know? I've got a detective following him. And Vale? Same. Charles Harlan? Kramer shook his head. Still missing. Dead? No body. Then he remains alive. Kramer looked at Wolfe. You're beginning to sound like me. I apologize. Kramer ignored it. There's more, naturally. Both men recently withdrew money. How much? 25,000 each. I frowned. Why? Unknown. Cash? Cash. That suggests, did they go? Vale went to an old warehouse in Brooklyn. Sloan, West 35th Street. The room went silent. Kramer looked at me. Your street. I looked toward the window. The street outside appeared ordinary. People walked. Cars passed. A delivery man carried boxes. Nothing unusual. How close? 2 blocks. To what? Your brownstone. I turned to Wolfe. Someone is searching for the property. Yes. Not the building. No. The evidence. Exactly. Kramer sat down. There's another problem. What? Arthur Vale was seen meeting a man. Who? Couldn't identify him. Description? Grey coat. I looked at Reed. Reed's face tightened. Same man? Possibly. Missing fingers? Kramer nodded. 2. Nobody spoke. Wolfe's hand remained on the map. Then we have confirmation. Of what? Kramer asked. The evidence is active. Kramer frowned. What does that mean? It means someone is no longer waiting for the past to remain buried. He's looking for the ledger. Yes, before we find it. Yes, then let's find it first. Wolfe shook his head. Too late. Kramer stared. Why? Because the man already knows where it is. How? The foundation, I said. The ledger was in the warehouse. Yes, 30 years ago. Yes. The warehouse was demolished. Yes, the modern building covers the site. Yes. So where could the ledger be? Wolfe pointed to the old map. Not beneath the building. I stared. Then where? Adjacent. He traced the 6-foot strip. The property line was altered. Yes. The ledger was moved. By whom? Edwin Mercer. I looked at him. How do you know? I don't. Then why say it? Because the ledger is the only document capable of proving the boundary fraud. Reed's survey already does. The survey proves the measurement. The ledger proves intent. I understood. The survey could show that the property line had been changed. The ledger could show who ordered the change, who paid for it, who benefited, who knew, and, perhaps, who owned property 35. Then that's what they're after. Yes. Where would Mercer hide it? Wolfe looked toward Daniel Reed. Reed spoke quietly. He would hide it where nobody would think to search. Where? Among the things that proved the property existed. I looked at the map. The foundation. Reed shook his head. No. Then what? The original survey points. I frowned. The stones? Perhaps. One survives. Then there may be others. Wolfe nodded. Exactly. That afternoon I returned to the commercial block. This time I did not go alone. Kramer sent 2 detectives in plain clothes. Daniel Reed came with me. We searched the surrounding streets. The first survey point was the foundation stone. The second lay beneath an old retaining wall. The third was more difficult. We found it 2 blocks away beneath a modern sidewalk. A small triangular mark, almost invisible, but unmistakable. Reed touched it. This is the last point. What does the triangle indicate? The center. The center of what? The original property. I looked around. We were standing outside an ordinary office building. Nothing remarkable. No abandoned warehouse. No secret entrance. No old doorway. Just glass, concrete, and pedestrians. I checked the measurements. The 3 points formed a triangle. The 4th elevation placed the original ground level below us. 4 feet. What does that tell us? Reed looked toward the building. Something is below. Under the sidewalk, perhaps? How deep? 4 feet. Then the evidence could be buried. No. Why? Because the old warehouse had a basement. I looked at him. The ledger could have been there. Yes. Under the current building. Yes. Then why did you say not beneath the building? Because I don't think Mercer hid it in the basement. Where? Reed's eyes moved to the street, the passage, the 6-foot strip. Yes, the property that disappeared, yes. He pointed toward the narrow service alley. The old access lane ran there. I followed his finger. The modern alley was only 6 feet wide. Exactly. I looked at the stone, then the map, then Reed. Someone built over the property, yes, but left the passage, because they couldn't legally close it, unless they changed the records, which they did. I smiled. So the missing property wasn't erased. No. It was incorporated. Exactly. When we returned to the brownstone, Wolfe had already marked the same conclusion. The property survived physically, yes. Under the modern block, yes. The access lane survived, yes. The survey points, yes. The evidence could survive, yes. Wolfe sat back. Then the question is not where property 35 is. What is it? Who has been protecting it? I frowned. Protecting? Yes. We've assumed everyone wanted it erased. That was the original intention. But now? Someone wants it found. Reed, perhaps. Mercer dead. Then who? Wolfe looked at me. The man who stood beneath our street lamp. Charles Haynes? Possibly. But Reed said the man with the missing fingers was connected to Westbridge. Yes, could he be Haynes? He could. Why? Would Haynes reveal the evidence? Perhaps he did not. I stared. Someone else could be using him, or using his identity, the photograph, the missing corner, the false death, the watcher, yes. I felt the case shifting again. For weeks it had seemed like a simple old fraud. 4 businessmen, 1 surveyor, 1 stolen property, 1 missing ledger. Now it looked like something more complicated. Someone had spent years preserving pieces of the truth. Someone else had spent years destroying them. And now both sides had begun moving. Kramer entered with another report. Arthur Vale is gone. Wolfe looked up. When? An hour ago. From where? His apartment. Did he leave voluntarily? We don't know. Signs of struggle? None. His car? Still. Phone? Gone. Wallet? Gone. Anything? Missing? Files. What files? Westbridge records. Kramer looked toward Reed. Your old company. Reed's expression became grim. Then they've started. Started what? Removing the past. That night, Wolfe ordered every window in the brownstone closed. Not because of weather, because he wanted silence. The office lights remained low. The city outside continued its usual noise. Taxi horns, footsteps, distant sirens, the hum of traffic. I stood at the front window. He's there. Wolfe did not ask who. The figure stood beneath the street lamp. Same coat, same hat, same posture, but something had changed. He was not looking at the house. He was looking at the pavement, at the ground, at the place where property 35 had once existed. I watched him for several minutes. Then he crossed the street. He stopped beside the iron fence. He looked up. This time he did not raise his hand. Instead, he took something from his pocket. A folded sheet. He held it beneath the street lamp, then tore it in half, then again. He dropped the pieces, he turned, and walked away. I went downstairs outside. Beneath the lamp lay 4 pieces of paper. I picked them up. They were blank, except for 1 word on the final fragment. Burned. I carried them upstairs. Wolfe read it. His expression changed. That's a warning. From him? Someone else? Yes. Daniel Reed stood near the desk. He looked at the word, then at Wolfe. They know that we found the property, that the evidence survived. Wolfe nodded. Then we must move quickly, Kramer said. To where? Wolfe looked at the old map. To the place that was erased. The commercial block? No. The survey point? No. Then where? Wolfe pointed to property 35. I looked at the map. There's no entrance, not now. Then how do we get there? Wolfe's eyes settled on Daniel Reed. Mr. Reed? Yes? You surveyed the property, yes. Where was the original access? Reed stared at the map. Then his face changed. The loading passage, the 6-foot strip. Yes. Where did it lead? And from there? Reed was silent. Mr. Reed, he looked at Wolfe. There was a room. What room? The counting room. Above the warehouse floor. Yes. You said the ledger was taken upstairs. I did. Then why did you not mention the room? Reed looked down. Because I thought it had been destroyed. Wolfe's voice remained calm. Why? Because after I disappeared, the building was sealed, yet the room remained. Possibly. Then that is where the ledger may be. Reed nodded slowly. Yes, Kramer stood. Then we search it. Wolfe shook his head. No. Kramer stared. Again. Why? Because someone else is already searching. The inspector looked toward the dark street. You think they'll get there first. I know they are trying. Then what do we do? Wolfe closed the map. We let them. I stared. Let them? They may lead us to the evidence. Or destroy it, that is the risk. Kramer looked disgusted. I hate your methods. I know. They're dangerous. Frequently. And if the evidence is destroyed? Wolfe's eyes became hard. Then we shall have to prove the truth without it. Nobody spoke. The city continued outside. The commercial block across Manhattan remained innocent in appearance. Yet beneath it lay a property that official records claimed had never existed. Beneath that property lay the original boundaries. Somewhere nearby lay the missing ledger. And somewhere in the city walked men who had spent 30 years believing the past could be buried permanently. They had made one mistake. They had forgotten that land remembers. So do maps. So do stones. So do men like Daniel Reed. And above all, so did Nero Wolfe. He rose slowly from his chair. Mr. Goodwin. Yes? Tomorrow morning you will return to property 35 alone? No. With Kramer? No. He looked toward Daniel Reed. With him. Reed nodded. And what are we looking for? Wolfe's expression was almost serene. The room that was supposed to disappear. I smiled. Another impossible room. No. He glanced toward the old map. An ordinary room. Then his eyes moved to the torn warning on the desk. With extraordinary contents. Chapter 7. The shadow steps into the light. At 9 o'clock the following morning, a photograph arrived at the brownstone without a messenger. That was the sort of delivery that makes a man suspicious before he has opened the envelope. I was in the hallway when I heard the letter slot click. No footsteps followed. No bell. No knock. Just the small metallic sound of paper passing through the slot. I opened the front door. Nobody was on the stoop. The street was almost empty. A newspaper boy stood half a block away. A woman in a blue coat was waiting for a cab. A delivery truck had stopped at the corner. Nothing else. I picked up the envelope. It was cream-colored, unmarked, and sealed with ordinary glue. On the front, written in black ink, were 4 words. For Nero Wolfe, only I carried it upstairs. Wolfe was at his desk. Daniel Reed sat near the window. Kramer had not yet arrived. I placed the envelope before Wolfe. He looked at it. Where? Letter slot. Messenger? Time? 9. He considered the envelope. Open it. You don't want gloves? No, I slit it with a letter opener. A photograph slid onto the desk. For several seconds nobody spoke. It showed the old Harrison Wharf property. The warehouse stood behind a group of men. 4 were immediately recognizable. Edwin Mercer, Charles Harlan, George Bell, Richard Sloane. But this photograph was different from the others. The angle was wider. The warehouse was visible. The 6-foot access strip was visible. And in the background, near the corner of the building, stood a 5th man. He was not hiding. He was not blurred. He was looking directly toward the camera. Young, perhaps 28, dark-haired, lean. His right hand rested against a wooden post. His left hand held a folder. I looked at Reed. He had gone completely still. Wolfe studied the photograph. Then he said, Arthur Sloane. Kramer arrived 3 minutes later. He entered with his coat unbuttoned and a newspaper tucked beneath one arm. Morning, he saw the photograph. Stop. What is that? Wolfe pushed it toward him. Kramer stared. Who is the fifth man? Arthur Sloane. Kramer looked at him. Who? Arthur Sloane. Richard's brother? Yes. I've never heard of him. That is why he is important. Kramer bent over the photograph. How do you know? Wolfe pointed to the face. Because I have seen his name. Where? In the erased margin. Kramer looked at the old survey book. The name wasn't there. It was beneath the paper. But the name we found was Daniel Reed. Correct. Then where did Arthur Sloane appear? Wolfe pointed toward a page. Kramer opened it. A small notation had been written in faded ink beside one of the original property measurements. A.S. Kramer frowned. That could mean anything. Yes. Wolfe took the photograph from him. Until now. He placed it beside the newspaper image. The initials belonged to the man in the background. I leaned over. How can you be certain? The hand. What hand? The left hand. The fifth man held a folder. 2 fingers were bent around its edge. The thumb was visible, the index finger, the middle finger. Then a gap. The ring finger was missing. I looked up. The man with the missing fingers. Wolfe nodded. Exactly. Kramer swore. So the watcher is Arthur Sloane. Not necessarily. Why not? Because resemblance is not identity. I looked at Wolfe. You said his name immediately. I recognized him, that's different. Yes. Kramer shook his head. You're telling me Richard Sloane had a younger brother nobody recorded? Not nobody. Who recorded him? Edwin Mercer. The room became quiet. The omission was remarkable. Richard Sloane had been a major figure in Westbridge development. His name appeared in company records, tax records, business directories, court documents, newspaper accounts, and property filings. His family had been investigated after his death. His wife had been interviewed. His son had been questioned. Yet no surviving record mentioned a brother, not one. Arthur Sloane did not appear in the company registry. He did not appear in Westbridge's employee records. He did not appear in the insurance files. He did not appear in the newspapers. He did not appear in the photographs that had survived publicly, except now he did. Twice, in the old photograph, and in the man who had stood across from our house. Kramer stared at the image. How does a man disappear from every record? Carefully, I said. Thank you. You're welcome. Wolfe lifted a finger. Arthur Sloane was not omitted because he was unimportant. Then why? Because he was important enough to conceal. Kramer leaned against the desk. What did he do? Wolfe looked toward Daniel Reed. Mr. Reed? Reed's face remained pale. He was at the warehouse? Yes. What was his role? I never knew. You saw him? Several times. Working for Westbridge? No. Yes. Did you know they were brothers? Reed shook his head. I knew only that Richard trusted him. Trusted him with what? The records. Kramer frowned. What records? The private ones? The ledger? Reed nodded. Arthur had access to everything. To the accounting books, property maps, private contracts. Then he knew about Property 35. He knew more than that, Wolfe said quietly. He knew how the entire operation worked. Reed looked at him. Yes. Kramer took the photograph and turned it over. Nothing. No writing, no date, no studio mark, no photographer's stamp. Just blank paper. I said. It was delivered without a note. Yes, Wolfe replied. Why? Because the photograph is the note. I looked at the image. 5 men, 4 conspirators, 1 observer. The warehouse behind them. The disputed property. And Arthur Sloane. The missing corner of the earlier photograph had removed him. The second photograph restored him. I said. Someone wants us to see him. Wolfe nodded. That is obvious. Then why? Because we are ready. For what? The final explanation. Kramer gave him a skeptical look. You're not going to explain the whole thing now? No. Why not? Because one person is still lying. Kramer looked around the room. Who? Wolfe's eyes moved toward the door. That is what we shall discover. At 10:15, Wolfe telephoned Thomas Avery. At 10:20, he telephoned Victor Lang. At 10:30, he telephoned Margaret Harcourt. At 10:40, he telephoned Arthur Vale. At 10:50, he telephoned Henry Sloan. At 11, he telephoned Daniel Kerr. At 11:10, he telephoned the two surviving officials who had handled the Westbridge property transfers. At 11:20, he telephoned Kramer again. "Why?" the inspector asked. "Because you have not yet invited anyone. I thought you were doing it. I was testing your attention. You are an unpleasant man." Yes, by noon the office was ready. Wolfe had arranged the chairs in a semicircle. The photographs lay on the desk. The survey book was open. The old map was pinned to the wall. The brass key sat beside it. The torn warning remained beneath the glass paperweight. Daniel Reed sat quietly near the window. I stood beside Wolfe's desk. Kramer occupied the largest chair. He looked at the assembled evidence, then at Wolfe. "You're sure?" "Yes. About what?" "Everything except the final contradiction. You've narrowed it down to one. Who?" Wolfe looked at the door. "You will know." They arrived one by one. Thomas Avery first. He looked nervous. Victor Lang came next. Then Arthur Vale. He was a broad-shouldered man in his 50s, with thinning hair and an expression that suggested he had spent his life trying to make other people believe he knew more than he did. Henry Sloan arrived 10 minutes later. He was younger, late 30s, tall, well-dressed, calm. That was the first thing I noticed. Daniel Kerr followed, then two former city property officials, then Margaret Harcourt, then Thomas Avery's assistant. The room filled. Wolfe remained seated. No refreshments were served. That was significant. When Wolfe intended to entertain, Fritz was summoned. When Wolfe intended to expose someone, nobody was fed. The door closed. Wolfe looked around. "I have asked you here because the history of Westbridge development has been misunderstood for 30 years. Nobody moved. Some of you believed it was a property dispute. Others looked at one another. Some believed it was a financial fraud," he continued. "Some believed it was the disappearance of a surveyor." Daniel Reed lowered his eyes. "And some believed it was the death of Edwin Mercer." Silence. "It was all of those." Wolfe paused. "But none was the central crime." He picked up the old map. The central crime was the deliberate removal of property 35 from the record. Arthur Vale shifted in his chair. Henry Sloan remained still. Wolfe noticed. So did I. The property belonged legally to the Wainwright family. Margaret Harcourt looked surprised. Wolfe continued. The land was narrow, 6 feet at its widest, but it controlled access to the river. Westbridge wanted it. Reed was commissioned to survey it. He measured it correctly. Then Westbridge attempted to alter his measurements. Daniel Reed remained silent. Mr. Reed refused. Wolfe held up the survey book. "These are the original records. These are the alterations. These changes benefited a specific group of investors." He pointed toward the property officials. "Every altered boundary increased the value of adjacent Westbridge-controlled parcels." One official shifted uneasily. Kramer watched him. Wolfe continued. "The operation was methodical, not dramatic. No single change looked significant. 4 feet, 6 feet, 8, 10. Together they transformed ownership." He put down the ruler. "The final step was property 35. They could not alter the measurement sufficiently, so they removed the property itself, not physically, administratively. It disappeared from the records." The room was silent. Wolfe looked toward Arthur Vale. "You knew about that." Vale swallowed. "I knew there had been a dispute. More than that. I was not involved." Wolfe said nothing. Vale looked away. Henry Sloan shifted. I noticed his right hand. He was squeezing the armrest. Wolfe lifted the first photograph. "This photograph was taken on September 18th. He pointed to the 4 men: Mercer, Harlan, Bell, Richard Sloan. He pointed to the missing corner. "Someone removed this section. Why? Because the 5th man was inconvenient." He lifted the second photograph. "Here he is." Arthur Vale stared. Henry Sloan did not. "That was interesting. This man is Arthur Sloan," several people murmured. "Richard Sloan's younger brother. He was not listed in the company records. He had no official position, yet he was present. Why?" Wolfe looked toward Henry Sloan. "Because he was the keeper of the private records." Henry Sloan finally spoke. "That is absurd." Wolfe turned. "Is it?" My uncle was not involved. Your uncle, Arthur Sloane, you knew him, of course. Where is he now? Henry hesitated. I don't know, Kramer leaned forward. Dead? I assume so. Assume? Henry looked at him. He disappeared years ago. Wolfe smiled faintly. Another disappearance. Henry's jaw tightened. I don't know what you're suggesting. I am not suggesting. Wolfe lifted the second photograph. I am reconstructing. He pointed to Arthur Sloane's hand. The missing fingers. Several people looked. Arthur Sloane lost 2 fingers in an accident. Henry said nothing. Wolfe continued. That accident occurred in a warehouse. Henry looked up. How do you know? Because Edwin Mercer recorded it. Henry's face changed, only for a moment, but it was enough. I knew then that Wolfe had found his contradiction. He had expected Henry to deny knowing the detail. Instead, Henry had asked how Wolfe knew. Wolfe didn't miss it, he continued. Arthur Sloane was present during the final Westbridge meeting. He knew about the altered survey. He knew about Property 35. He knew about the private ledger. And he knew Daniel Reed had refused to cooperate. Daniel Reed spoke. Yes. Wolfe nodded. Then came the disappearance. He turned toward Reed. Reed was threatened with prosecution using forged survey documents. He was forced into hiding. Westbridge announced that he had fled the country. The records were altered. His name disappeared. His work was discredited. But he preserved the original survey. Reed nodded. I did. Wolfe looked around. That should have been the end. It was not. Edwin Mercer regretted his participation. He looked toward Thomas Avery. Mr. Mercer spent years trying to recover the truth. Avery nodded. He knew the records had been divided. He knew Property 35 had been deliberately erased. He knew Reed was alive. He knew Arthur Sloane was connected. Yet he could not prove it. Why? Wolfe held up the photograph. Because the missing ledger was gone, Kramer asked. Where? Wolfe looked toward the map. Somewhere beneath Property 35. A murmur passed through the room. Mercer believed it had survived. He was correct. The evidence resurfaced shortly before his death. That was why he sent the photograph to Mr. Avery. That was why the photograph reached me. That was why the watcher appeared. He looked at Daniel Reed, and that was why Mr. Reed watched this house. Reed nodded. I needed to know who was watching you. Wolfe turned to the group. Now we reach the curious part. He picked up the brass key. Someone sent us this. He placed it on the desk. The key opened the cabinet containing the survey book. The numbers led us to the survey points. The foundation stone confirmed the location. The property map reconstructed the missing parcel. All of this appears to have been designed. Kramer nodded. Yes, but by whom? Wolfe's eyes moved around the room. That is the question. He picked up the second photograph. Someone wanted me to find Arthur Sloane. Arthur Vale suddenly spoke. Maybe the man in the photograph wasn't Arthur. Wolfe looked at him. Who then? Vale hesitated. I don't know. Interesting. Why? Because the photograph is clear. Vale's face tightened. Faces can deceive, not measurements. Wolfe opened the survey book. Arthur Sloane's initials appear beside the 4th revision. He turned the page. The handwriting belongs to George Bell. Kramer said. We know that. We have enough samples. Who compared them? The city archivist. And confirmed. Wolfe looked toward Vale. Your uncle's initials were placed beside the alteration. Vale said nothing. Wolfe turned toward Henry Sloane. And you knew this? Henry's face remained calm. I knew nothing about the survey. That is your first contradiction. I didn't contradict anything. You did. How? I said Arthur Sloane's initials appeared beside the 4th revision. Wolfe paused. You asked whether the photograph showed him. Henry frowned. I did not. You did. No. You said, maybe the man in the photograph wasn't Arthur. Wolfe's eyes narrowed. I had not yet said the initials belonged to Arthur Sloane. Silence. I looked at Henry. Kramer looked at Henry. Daniel Reed looked at Henry. Henry realized it too late. Wolfe leaned back. You knew the initials. Henry said nothing. You knew the photograph. You knew Arthur Sloane. You knew the missing fingers. And you knew the 4th revision. Henry stood abruptly. This is ridiculous. Kramer rose. Henry sat. Wolfe remained calm. The lie was small, but it was useful, because it established knowledge, not guilt yet. Henry Sloane's face had become pale. Wolfe turned toward him. Your father, Richard Sloane, participated in the Westbridge fraud. Yes. Arthur Sloane kept the private records. You knew where they were? No. Then why did you search for Reed? Henry froze. Kramer leaned forward. What? Wolfe continued. 2 days ago you withdrew $25,000. Henry said nothing. You visited the old Westbridge property. You visited Harrison Wharf. You searched your father's records. You also visited Daniel Reed's former address. Henry looked at Kramer. How? Police work, Wolfe corrected him. Observation, Kramer glared. Wolfe continued. You were not searching for Reed. Henry said nothing. You were searching for the ledger. Henry finally spoke. I wanted to know what my father had done. No. Wolfe's voice hardened. You wanted to know what Arthur Sloane had left behind. Henry shook his head. You have no proof. Not yet. Wolfe lifted the photograph. Arthur Sloane was not merely a clerk. He controlled the records. He knew the investors. He knew the false transfers. He knew the forged surveys. He knew where Property 35 was. And he knew the ledger could destroy everyone connected to Westbridge. Henry's eyes moved toward the door. Kramer noticed. So did your father. Henry whispered. Yes, the admission hints before he could stop it. Nobody spoke. Wolfe said, thank you. Henry looked at him. What? You have saved us considerable time. Kramer moved behind Henry's chair. Keep going. Wolfe nodded. Arthur Sloane was the controlling mind behind the deception. Kramer frowned. Not Richard. Richard handled operations. Bell handled legal matters. Harlan handled the company. Mercer handled finances. But Arthur Sloane coordinated the private transfers. Why was he? Omitted from the records. Because he had no official position. That gave him freedom and anonymity. Exactly. Wolfe looked toward Daniel Reed. Mr. Reed, did Arthur Sloane order the altered survey? Reed nodded. Yes. Did he threaten you? Yes. Did he know you kept the original? I believe so. Did he arrange your disappearance? I don't know. Wolfe turned toward Henry. You know. Henry remained silent. Your uncle arranged it. No, you said you knew nothing. I don't. Then why did you say no? Henry's face went white. Kramer smiled grimly. Second contradiction. Wolfe said nothing. He did not need to. The silence did the work. Then the door opened. Everyone turned. A man stood on the threshold. Grey coat, thin face, hat in hand. 2 fingers missing from his left hand. I knew him immediately. So did Daniel Reed. So did Henry Sloane. The room froze. The man looked at Wolfe, then at the photograph, then at the assembled people. Finally he said, My name is Arthur Sloane. Kramer moved. Arthur raised both hands. I am not here to fight. Wolfe looked at him. You are late. Arthur gave a tired smile. I wanted to hear the explanation. You heard enough. Yes. He stepped inside. Daniel Reed stared at him. You, Arthur nodded. Yes. You watched the house. Yes. You sent the key. Yes. The numbers. Yes. The second photograph. Yes. Wolfe remained still. And the warning beneath the fence? Arthur's expression changed. No. Wolfe's eyes narrowed. Who wrote it? Arthur shook his head. I don't know. Again. But this time it was different, because now the man who had vanished 30 years ago stood in front of us. Alive. And he was frightened? Arthur looked at Wolfe. The warning was written by someone else. Who? Arthur hesitated, then looked at Henry Sloane. His father. Henry stood. My father is dead. Arthur nodded. Then how? Because Richard left instructions. Arthur's voice became quieter. He knew the ledger would surface eventually. Wolfe asked, Where is it? Arthur looked at him. Not where you think. Where? Arthur turned toward the old map. Under Property 35. I frowned. We searched the survey points. You searched the points. Yes, you did not search the room. Wolfe's eyes sharpened. The counting room. Arthur nodded. The room that was supposed to disappear. Kramer stepped forward. Is the ledger there? Arthur looked at him. It was. Was? Arthur's expression hardened. Someone has moved it. The room went silent. Wolfe looked toward Henry. Henry looked away. Arthur said, And I know who. Wolfe's voice remained calm. Then say it. Arthur looked at his nephew. Henry. Henry closed his eyes. For several seconds nobody moved. Then Wolfe stood. The case is nearly finished. I looked at him. Nearly? Wolfe nodded. One question remains. What? He looked at Arthur Sloane. Who killed Edwin Mercer? Arthur's face became grim. I don't know. Wolfe's eyes shifted toward Henry. Henry said nothing. And in that silence, I knew we had reached the real beginning of the end. The photograph had revealed Arthur Sloane. The altered survey had revealed the theft. The missing property had revealed the motive. Daniel Reed had revealed the original fraud. But Edwin Mercer's death was still waiting, and Wolfe, who had spent days following measurements, shadows, erased names, and vanished properties, had finally gathered every principal actor into one room. He knew one of them would break. He had only to discover which one. Outside, evening had settled over West 35th Street. The street lamp opposite the brownstone came on. For the first time in weeks, nobody stood beneath it. The shadow had stepped into the light, and Nero Wolfe was ready for the final question. Wolfe explains. The shadow, at 10 minutes past 8 the next morning, Nero Wolfe closed the office door. That was how I knew the explanation had begun. Wolfe had a number of methods for announcing that a matter had reached its final stage. Sometimes he sent Fritz away. Sometimes he ordered beer. Sometimes he rearranged the chairs with the solemnity of a man preparing a courtroom. This time he simply closed the door. Inside the office were Inspector Kramer, Daniel Reed, Thomas Avery, Arthur Sloane, Henry Sloane, Arthur Vale, and two former Westbridge officials who had spent the better part of their careers, assuring people that certain property records were perfectly legitimate. I stood beside Wolfe's desk with a notebook in my hand. The photographs lay before him. The old survey book was open. The map of Property 35 covered most of the desk. The brass key rested beside it. Wolfe looked at the assembled company. Mr. Kramer. The inspector folded his arms. Yes, you wanted the answer. I did. You shall have it. Kramer glanced toward Henry Sloane. And the arrest? That will follow. That's comforting. It should not be. Kramer sighed. Proceed. Wolfe turned toward Daniel Reed. Reed, 30 years ago, you surveyed a property known as Parcel 35. Yes. The property was 6 feet wide in certain sections. Yes. It controlled access between several commercial lots and the river. Yes. It was legally owned by the Wainwright family. Correct. Westbridge Development wanted it. Reed nodded. They wanted it because without it their adjoining properties were less valuable. Yes. Not merely less valuable. Wolfe paused. They were commercially crippled. Reed looked at him. That is correct. Wolfe reached for the old map. That is where the first deception began. He placed a ruler across the property lines. Westbridge did not attempt to steal the parcel in one operation. They altered neighboring boundaries. 4 feet here, 6 feet there, 8 somewhere else. Each alteration appeared trivial. Together they created the appearance that Parcel 35 had ceased to exist as an independent property. Arthur Vale shifted in his chair. Wolfe noticed. He noticed everything, Mr. Vale. Yes? You were not one of the original 4 principals. No, but your family invested in Westbridge. Yes. You benefited from the boundary changes. I did not personally. Your family. Vale said nothing. Wolfe returned his attention to the map. The method was simple. The rectures, the surveys were revised. The neighboring parcels were enlarged. Eventually Parcel 35 disappeared from the official sequence. He touched the blank section. Not sold, not transferred, not condemned, erased. Kramer said, and Reed caught them. Yes. Wolfe looked toward Reed. You refused to alter your survey. I did, so they altered the circumstances surrounding you instead. Reed's jaw tightened. They forged a revised survey bearing my name, then threatened to prosecute you for fraud. Yes, after which you disappeared. Yes. Kramer leaned forward. You were forced into hiding. Reed nodded. I had no choice. Wolfe's voice remained calm. That was the second deception. He picked up the first photograph. This photograph was taken on September 18th. The image showed the warehouse, the 4 men, the missing corner. The public copy had its upper right corner removed. That removed a 5th figure. He placed the complete photograph beside it. Arthur Sloane. Arthur sat very still. The missing fingers on his left hand were unmistakable. He was Richard Sloane's younger brother. He held no official position. He appeared nowhere in Westbridge's public records. Yet he had access to the private records. Arthur said quietly, Yes. Wolfe looked at him. You were the man behind the internal bookkeeping. Arthur did not deny it. I kept records, private records, yes. Payments, some instructions, some boundary changes, yes. Names of investors, yes, Kramer said. And you were omitted because… Arthur looked down. Because Richard believed I was safer without a public connection to the company. Wolfe nodded. That was true, until the photograph. Until the photograph. He laid the two photographs side by side. The missing corner was not removed because Arthur Sloane was irrelevant. It was removed because his presence established that someone outside the official company structure was directing the private operation. Arthur looked at the image. My brother wanted the photograph destroyed, but Edwin Mercer kept another copy. Yes. Why? Because Mercer had begun to regret what he had done. Wolfe nodded. And that brings us to the third deception. He lifted the survey book. Edwin Mercer eventually realized that the property scheme could not be contained. He knew Daniel Reed had preserved the original survey. He knew the altered measurements could be traced. He knew the private ledger existed. And he knew Arthur Sloane had retained knowledge of the entire operation. Henry Sloane spoke suddenly. My father knew. Wolfe turned. Yes, my father was involved. Yes, but he didn't control it. No, Henry looked at Arthur. My father told me Arthur was the one who knew everything. Arthur's expression did not change. He was right, Wolfe said. Richard Sloane handled operations. Charles Harlan controlled the company. George Bell handled the legal machinery. Edwin Mercer handled finances. And Arthur Sloane maintained the private record. He paused. Each man believed he controlled a different part of the deception. They were mistaken. Kramer frowned. Who controlled the whole thing? Wolfe looked at Arthur. Arthur Sloane. Arthur did not object. At least initially, the room became quiet. Wolfe continued. Arthur's purpose was not simply to steal parcel 35. It was to create a system in which no individual document could expose the whole fraud. The altered survey showed the boundary. The property records showed the transfer. The private ledger showed payments. The photographs showed the people. Each piece alone was incomplete. Together they were devastating, I said, which explains why the pieces were separated. Wolfe looked at me. Exactly. I felt pleased for about 3 seconds, then Wolfe continued. Mr. Goodwin has occasionally been useful. I decided to accept it. Wolfe picked up the brass key. This was left beneath our fence. He placed it on the map. The key opened a cabinet containing the survey book. The numbers were 35, 17, and 4. Those numbers initially appeared to indicate a property, a cabinet, and a revision. They did not. They referred to survey points and an elevation. Why? Because someone wanted the original ground position reconstructed. Daniel Reed nodded. I used those survey points, but not those numbers. No. Wolfe looked toward Arthur. You did. Arthur nodded. I had copies of Reed's work. You retained them, yes. And when Edwin Mercer died, I knew the time had come. Why? Because Mercer had finally sent the photograph to Mr. Avery. Thomas Avery spoke. He left instructions. Yes, he said the photograph should go to you, because he believed I could reconstruct the chain, Arthur said quietly. He was right, Kramer interrupted. Let's get to Mercer. Wolfe nodded. That is the important part. He picked up the second photograph. The photograph appeared at the brownstone after the investigation had already begun. Who sent it? Arthur raised his hand slightly. I did. I looked at him. You sent it? Yes. You sent the key too? Yes. And the numbers? Yes. And the photographs? Yes. I frowned. But Daniel Reed was the man standing across the street. Arthur looked at Reed. Yes. Then why were you sending the evidence? Arthur answered. Because I needed Reed to remain hidden. I looked at Wolfe. That explained something. Arthur had not been the nightly watcher. He had been the man behind the evidence. Reed had been the watcher. Arthur had been the hand moving pieces into place. Wolfe clarified it. The distinction is important. Mr. Reed stood beneath the street lamp. Mr. Sloane remained unseen. Mr. Reed's repeated appearances were a signal. Mr. Sloane's photographs and keys were evidence. The two operations were connected, but they were not performed by the same man, I said. So the shadow was Reed. Yes, and the person sending the evidence was Arthur. Yes. Kramer looked at Arthur. Why? Arthur answered. Because I could not safely approach Wolfe. Why not? Someone was watching me. Who? Arthur looked toward Henry. I suspected Richard's people. Henry said nothing. Arthur continued. But I was wrong. Wolfe's eyes narrowed. You were watched by someone else. Yes. Who? Arthur looked toward Henry again. His son. Henry stood. I never watched you. Wolfe raised one hand. Sit down. Henry sat. Wolfe turned toward me. Now we come to the nightly appearances. He took the first photograph. Mr. Reed knew the evidence had to reach me, but he could not approach openly. His disappearance had protected him for decades. If he suddenly appeared at the brownstone, anyone monitoring the old Westbridge affair would know he had resurfaced. So he chose a method. Every evening at precisely 8:40, he stood beneath the street lamp. At 9:05, he left. That established a pattern. The pattern made his presence appear harmless, yet the exact timing served another purpose, to indicate that the signal was deliberate. I nodded. The raised hand, yes. The signal meant he possessed information, but could not safely deliver it. Correct. Why did he choose West 35th Street? Reed answered. Because it was visible from the old route used by Westbridge. Someone watching the house would see me, and someone watching you would know the case was active. Yes, Wolfe added. The watcher was therefore watching the watcher. Kramer frowned. That sounds unnecessarily complicated. It was. Why? Because the original crime had been complicated. Wolfe placed the survey book beside the photograph. The people responsible had divided the evidence among several locations. They had altered records. They had erased names. They had concealed property. They had created false identities. And, after 30 years, the same habits continued. Kramer looked toward Arthur. You knew Mercer was going to die. Arthur shook his head. No. You're certain? Yes. Then why send the photograph immediately after his death? Because Mercer had already arranged for it to reach Wolfe. How did you know? He told me when. The day before he died. Kramer stared. You saw him? Yes. Where? His house. Was he frightened? Yes. Why? He believed someone had discovered the ledger. Who? Arthur hesitated. Henry. All eyes turned. Henry Sloane's face had gone white. I did not kill him. Wolfe said nothing. Arthur continued. Henry wanted the ledger. Why? Because his father had left him a message. What message? That the ledger contained evidence capable of destroying the Sloane family. Henry said, my father was trying to protect us. By preserving evidence of fraud, by keeping it from the police. That is not protection. It was to him. Wolfe raised his hand. Mr. Sloane. Henry stopped. Your father knew the ledger existed. Yes. He knew Arthur had access to it. Yes. He knew Mercer wanted it exposed. Yes. And he told you to recover it. Henry hesitated. Yes. When? Before he died? How long before? 3 months. Wolfe nodded. That is important. He turned to Kramer. Inspector. Yes. How did Edwin Mercer die? Heart failure. Was that your conclusions? Any evidence of poisoning? No. Struggle? No. Forced entry? No. Then how was he killed? Kramer stared at him. You've got an answer. I have a method. Go on. Wolfe looked at Thomas Avery. Mr. Avery, you said, Mr. Mercer was frightened before his death. Yes. Did he change his medication? No. Did he eat normally? Yes. Did he drink? Very little. Did he complain of chest pain? Not until the final day. Was anyone with him? His housekeeper? Anyone else? Henry Sloane visited. Henry closed his eyes. I did. When? The afternoon before he died. What did you discuss? Family matters. Did you mention the ledger? No. Wolfe looked at him. That is your third contradiction. Henry opened his eyes. You have no proof. Mr. Sloane, you just said you discussed family matters. Yes. You told Mr. Avery previously that you had never discussed Westbridge with Mercer. Henry stared. I did? Yes, I don't remember. I do. Wolfe's voice remained perfectly calm. That is the advantage of having a memory. Kramer smiled. Henry looked defeated, but Wolfe was not finished. Mr. Sloane visited Mercer because he believed the ledger had resurfaced. He wanted it. Mercer refused. So Henry threatened him. No, Henry looked up. I didn't. Wolfe nodded. I agree, everyone stared. Wolfe continued. Henry did not kill Edwin Mercer. Kramer frowned. Then why all this? Because Henry was the last person to speak to him. That makes him useful. Not guilty. Wolfe looked toward Arthur. The murderer was the person who knew Mercer would die without leaving a visible sign. Arthur's face tightened. You think it was me? No. Arthur looked surprised. Then who? Wolfe turned toward the photograph. George Bell. Kramer blinked. Bell has been dead 14 years. Yes. So? Then he cannot have killed Mercer. Exactly. Kramer stared at Wolfe. You're making a joke. No. Wolfe tapped the photograph. Bell established the mechanism. What mechanism? The fraud. He also established the habit. What habit? Using records to make reality appear different. Mercer died naturally. Perhaps. Wolfe opened a folder. Except his death certificate contains a discrepancy. Kramer leaned forward. What? The time. Avery looked surprised. The physician recorded Mercer as dying at 7:40. Wolfe pointed to another document. His housekeeper's statement says she saw him alive at 8:05. Kramer frowned. That could be a mistake. It could. And? The physician's watch was 4 minutes slow. How do you know? The watch was examined after his death. Kramer shook his head. That still doesn't prove murder. No. Wolfe opened another document. The physician's medication log was altered. Avery leaned forward. By whom? That is the point. Wolfe looked toward Henry. Not Henry. Toward Arthur. Not Arthur. Toward Reed. Not Reed. Someone else. The room became silent. Wolfe picked up the original photograph. The entire deception depended on one principle. Measurements had to agree. Dates had to agree. Records had to agree. Photographs had to agree. If one element contradicted another, the entire structure could collapse. He looked at the second photograph. That is why the corner was removed. The corner was not merely hiding Arthur Sloane. It was hiding the connection between Arthur and the private records. The survey measurements were altered. Property 35 was erased. The photographs were mutilated, names were removed, and the evidence was divided. He placed everything together. But there was one man who knew why all of these things had to disappear. He looked at Arthur. Arthur Sloane. Arthur nodded. But there was another man who knew where each piece had been hidden. He looked at Henry. Henry's face hardened. Your father, yes. Richard Sloane. Henry nodded. Richard knew the private system. He knew Arthur. He knew Mercer. He knew Reed. He knew the ledger. And he left instructions. Henry looked down. Yes. To you. Yes. Why? Because he believed the family would be ruined. Wolfe nodded. And that brings us to Edwin Mercer. Wolfe stood. He walked slowly to the map. Mercer had spent years trying to expose the fraud, but he could not do so without the ledger. Arthur preserved the ledger. Richard knew it existed. Henry searched for it. Reed preserved the survey. And the final photograph revealed Arthur. He touched property 35. All the evidence pointed here. That is why someone began destroying it. Kramer said, who? Wolfe turned. The person who killed Mercer. Henry Sloane. Henry rose. I told you. Sit down. No. Sit. Henry sat. Wolfe continued. You did not kill Mercer by force. You did not poison him. Did not need to. You altered his medication. Henry stared. No, only slightly. You changed the dosage. No. Not enough to appear deliberate. No. But enough to trigger the heart condition. Henry's face became rigid. That's impossible. Wolfe looked at Avery. Mr. Avery, did Mercer take medication for his heart? Yes. Did the dosage change? Not according to the official record. Exactly. Wolfe looked toward Henry. The official record was altered. Henry said nothing. You changed it. No. You knew the medicine. You knew the housekeeper's routine. No. You knew Mercer would be alone. No. You knew the ledger was about to surface. Henry's eyes flickered. That was enough. Kramer stood. Henry Sloane. Henry looked at him. Don't. Kramer moved closer. He did not resist, but Wolfe raised a hand. Not yet. Kramer stopped. Wolfe looked at Henry. Why? Henry's shoulders collapsed. For several seconds he stared at the floor. Then he whispered, because he was going to destroy my father. Your father was already dead. He was going to expose everything. That was the truth. It would have destroyed the family. It would have exposed crime. He had no right. Wolfe's expression hardened. He had every right. Henry looked toward Arthur. You don't understand, Arthur said quietly. I do. Henry laughed bitterly. My father told me that if Mercer ever found the ledger, I was to stop him. By killing him? He didn't say that. What did he say? Make sure he never opened it. Silence. Wolfe nodded. So you altered the medication. Henry lowered his head. I thought he would become ill. And he did. You did not intend to kill him. No, but you knew the risk. Henry closed his eyes. Yes. Kramer stepped forward. That's enough. This time Wolfe did not stop him. For several minutes nobody spoke. The case had lost its mystery, but it had not lost its sadness. Daniel Reed had lost 30 years. Edwin Mercer had spent 20 years trying to repair a crime he had helped commit. Arthur Sloane had hidden in the margins of history. Richard Sloane had died protecting a secret. Henry Sloane had killed to preserve it. And Property 35 had remained beneath an ordinary Manhattan block, while generations of people walked above it without knowing what had been taken from them. Kramer gathered the papers. I'll need the survey book. Wolfe nodded. The photographs. Yes, the ledger. Wolfe looked at Arthur. Arthur reached into his coat. For a moment I thought he was going to produce another mystery. Instead he removed a thin leather notebook. He placed it on Wolfe's desk. The ledger. Kramer stared. You had it, yes. Where? Arthur smiled faintly. Somewhere no one thought to look. Wolfe opened it. The pages were filled with names, amounts, property numbers, dates, and instructions. There it was, the whole operation. Payments to surveyors, instructions to lawyers, names of investors, property alterations, and Property 35, its true owner, its true boundaries, the original agreement, everything. Kramer exhaled. That's the case. No, Wolfe said. Kramer looked at him. This is the evidence. He closed the ledger. The case was solved before you entered the room. Later, after Kramer had taken Henry Sloane away and the others had departed, the office became quiet again. Only Wolfe, Reed, Avery, Arthur Sloane, and I remained. Arthur stood near the window. You knew, I said. About what? That Reed was watching us. You knew he would signal. Yes. You sent the evidence. Yes. Why not come yourself? Arthur looked at me. Because I had already disappeared once. Fair enough. Daniel Reed smiled. I told him Wolfe would understand. Arthur looked toward Wolfe. He did. Wolfe was examining the ledger. I understood the measurements. Arthur nodded. The measurements were the whole thing. Wolfe looked up. Yes. People thought the city belonged to whoever had the deeds. It belonged to whoever could make the deeds agree with the map. Exactly. Arthur looked toward the window. That was the secret. Wolfe shook his head. No. Arthur turned. What? The secret was not underground. He pointed toward the street. It was there. He looked at me. In the measurements. When everyone had gone, I poured myself a drink. Wolfe remained behind his desk. The afternoon light fell across the old map. The property lines were faint. The streets were different now. The buildings had changed. The people were gone. But the measurements remained. I said, you know, Wolfe, after all this, I still think the Watcher was the strangest part. Why? Because he stood under the same street lamp every night. Precision was necessary. Why? Because an irregular signal is not a signal. 8:40, yes. 9:05, yes. 15 minutes, enough time to be noticed. Not enough to invite interference, I considered that. And the raised hand? Confirmation of what? That he possessed the evidence. I looked toward Reed's empty chair. He was never threatening us. No, he was telling you to keep looking, yes. That's an odd way to ask for help. It was the only safe way. I smiled. Would you have noticed if I hadn't? Of course. How? The timing, naturally. I finished my drink. Then I looked at the map. All this began because somebody changed 6 feet. Wolfe corrected me. No. What? It began because somebody believed 6 feet did not matter. I nodded. That sounds more like you. It is. I looked through the window. West 35th Street was ordinary again. People crossed it without looking down. Cars passed over pavement covering foundations whose history they would never know. The street lamp opposite the brownstone stood empty. No figure, no signal, no watcher, no raised hand. The shadow had finally disappeared because it had done its work. I said, that's the oldest secret in the city. Wolfe closed the ledger. No. He looked toward the street. The oldest secret is that a city is measured before it is built. And men who understand the measurements can make the city say almost anything. He settled deeper into his chair. But not forever. That was the end. The police had the ledger. The original survey had been preserved. Daniel Reed's name would be restored. The Westbridge property scheme would be exposed. Property 35 would return to the records. Edwin Mercer's death would no longer be accepted as an innocent accident. And the man who had spent 30 years trying to make the truth disappear would finally have to answer for it. As for the figure beneath the street lamp, he was never a ghost, never a threat, and never a messenger in the ordinary sense. He was a surveyor. He stood where he could be seen. He arrived at the same minute. He left at the same minute. He raised one hand when Wolfe needed confirmation. He waited because he knew that Nero Wolfe did not chase shadows. He interpreted them. And in the end, the shadow across West 35th Street had revealed the one thing nobody had been able to erase. Not a building, not a name, not a man, a measurement. 6 feet of Manhattan that had never stopped belonging to the truth.